This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 4 minutes after 10. I may have already misspoken, which is quite an achievement, considering it's only 4 minutes after 10. And the programme hasn't even started properly. Technically, the bit I say at the end of Nick's show counts as Nick's show. So if, for example, you wanted to submit a complaint to Ofcom about something I say in that talk-up, it would be a complaint about Nick Ferrari's show, I think, not about mine. I don't know that we should talk about escalation. I got an early message on Blue Sky, the social media platform that seems to be gathering pace at a rate of knots at the moment. And it just pointed out that self-defense, from Alan, self-defense cannot be escalatory in the intended sense. Alan Colquhoun, who is a philosopher and author. And it stopped me a bit. It's nice to be on a social media site where you can actually see the sensible and intelligent contributions clearly, without having them drown in a sea of idiocy. But I understand what it means, and yet I don't understand what it means, which is always a good starting point for our time together in the morning. It is self-defense. So Russia invaded Ukraine, thinking, it's probably worth a quick reminder, that the Ukrainian regime would buckle in the course of a weekend. I mean, Vladimir Putin was certainly not expecting to be there 1,000 days later. I don't think he was expecting, I beg your pardon, to be fighting 1,000 days later. I don't think he was expecting to be fighting 10 days later, apart perhaps from sort of guerrilla warfare or some pockets of resistance. All the expert analysis tells us that the Russians expected Kiev to buckle under the weight of the Russian offensive. And spoiler alert, it didn't. So that's an invasion. That is, by any available definition of the phrase, an act of war or whatever you want to call it. And then Ukraine's business of resistance becomes confined to Ukrainian soil by, as I understood it, two things. The first being refusal from their allies and supporters to let them fire the missiles for which they depend upon their allies and supporters, chiefly the United States of America, but also, as you just heard, I think that was the Shadow Defence Secretary, was it, talking in the news bulletin? He sounded quite sensible. Let's hope that's not a curse of O'Brien kicking in quite early in Kemi Badenoch's shadow administration, but he sounded like he knew what he was talking about. And then the second element of it, of course, is the NATO side of things. So I thought, and I'm quite happy making a fool of myself for a couple of minutes at the beginning of a conversation, but I thought there was some concern that using American weaponry or using British weaponry on Russian soil constituted an action that would trigger NATO responsibilities. Maybe it's boots on the ground. Maybe it just actually has to be NATO troops moving onto Russian soil. But you haven't really got NATO troops on Ukrainian soil either. And so I woke up this morning and heard that news. Did it stop you in your tracks? Did it give you pause? That notion that American missiles and quite possibly very soon afterwards British missiles will be fired onto Russian soil in 2024. Did it give you pause? When I was interviewing Fiona Hill, who was an advisor on matters Russian to actually both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, did she advise Barack Obama as well? She's one of those people that you meet and you just sit there basking in their experience and expertise. But did I ever tell you that I also kept having a little voice in my head saying, don't mention Sting, don't mention Sting, don't mention Sting, because you're dealing with someone who has exercised diplomacy at the very highest, the highest imaginable level. And in the back of my head, I've got that flipping Sting song about the Russians. You know the one I mean. In Europe and America, there's a growing feeling of hysteria, conditioned to respond to every threat in the rhetorical speeches of the Soviets. And it was such a dangerous thing to do if the Russians love their children too. It was my first introduction to Cold War politics. Listening to that song, we didn't study it at my school. We were too busy building wattle and daub huts to emulate the experiences of the Pictish tribes of the north. So I've got this voice in the back of my head saying, don't mention Sting, don't mention... And then guess what happens? Have I told you this? I must have told you this. Fiona Hill mentioned Sting. She said when she was at school in the Northeast, her first real intimation of that kind of politics came from listening to her fellow Geordie, Sting, singing about the Russians. So I just thought of that. And then I thought of Neville Chamberlain. What? Well, then I thought of how quickly a reluctance to go to war, or a reluctance for more war. It was not the Fiona Hill who worked for Theresa May. Ian, no, absolutely not. Is demonised. Not to mount some sort of latter-day defence of Neville Chamberlain by any stretch of the imagination, but his name is synonymous with incompetence and cowardice, I think, for almost 100 years in this country. All students of 20th century history, all students of the Second World War see Neville Chamberlain, well, not all, but don't at me, that see Neville Chamberlain's capitulation, if you like, coming back, waving that piece of paper around, claiming that there was going to be no war in Europe. They see it as a sort of emblem of wrongness. And we never really stopped, or I certainly hadn't stopped here, to think about what was he doing? Why was he doing that? And the answer's pretty obvious. He didn't want to send another generation of British men to die fighting Germans. He didn't want to incur the enormous costs, the generational costs that fighting a war involved. And remember, the memory of the First World War, 1914 to 1918, was still very, very fresh, not only in his memory, but in the collective memory. So really, that impulse not to have another war must have been much stronger than we realise. High on the fumes of victory, always taught the vanquishing of the Nazi threat. One of the few battles, as we've discussed before, that could be construed as truly between good and evil. But I don't know how clear that was in 1939. But the impulse to not send another generation of men and boys to die probably gets a little bit overlooked. So when a war, what's the word I want? When a war, when it dials up just a little bit, I think we have to guard against saber rattling, don't we? We have to guard against being gung ho. Yay! Oh, guys. Chris knows what he's talking about. We're talking about Odessa in the first instance, 700 kilometres from the border. It's already been heavily bombed by Russia, so it's not as if using weapons with a range of 300 kilometres within Russia will even make for a level playing field. It won't even nudge towards a level playing field. But it does mean this. The American administration, the outgoing American administration, is giving Volodymyr Zelensky permission to fire missiles onto Russian soil. And I think that is a moment for pause and contemplation. I do actually. I have great faith in you, but I'm going to ask quite a straightforward question, which is what does this mean? What do you think this means to you? And also, given that your contributions are as valid as anybody who gets paid by the Daily Telegraph to pontificate on such matters, why now? Why do you think Biden has done it now? So there are two questions here. What does it mean? 0345 6060973. And why has Biden done it now? I mean, talk about too little too late. Is the North Korean intervention really that important? Thousands of Russians have already died. The North Koreans are just providing backup, if you like. They're filling gaps left by the death of Russian soldiers. So the notion of there being some sort of ethical or moral imperative that has suddenly arrived in the last 24 hours seems to me to be a little bit ridiculous. I think this might have as much to do with American politics as it does with Ukrainian self-defense. But I want you to explore that idea a little bit further. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Why now for Joe Biden? And that could open the door to all manner of ideas. And what does this mean? Militarily, there are an awful lot of armchair generals around, and some of them know what they're talking about. I'm not quite sure what it means, except that it's hopefully a sign of Ukraine not rolling over just as a consequence of Trump getting into the White House. But I don't know how significant it is, how meaningful it is, how substantive it is in the context of the broader conflict. Okay, so why has Joe Biden done it? Why has Joe Biden done it now? And what has Joe Biden done? Which is a sort of neater way, perhaps, of asking you what this means in the short term, in the long term, for Ukraine, for Russia, and possibly for the world. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through 0345 6060 973. The rest of the programme, as ever, when I'm in charge, is as yet undecided, although I'd be surprised if we don't turn our attention to the looming protests in London to be led by farmers who are furious about being required to pay half of the inheritance tax that everybody else pays on similar-sized estates. And I don't mean that necessarily as a criticism, as you will discover. I'd be very interested to see how the coverage reflects attempts by the likes of Just Stop Oil to bring the capital city to a standstill. Shall I predict a little bit of hypocrisy there? That people trying to protect the planet will perhaps be treated a little bit more harshly by members of His Majesty's media than people who are simply trying to protect their own wealth, their own I don't know. We shall see. I don't want to jump any guns. And if I told you that another guest on Full Disclosure, actually, I mentioned Fiona Hill a moment ago, has called upon the government to issue cigarette-style health warnings on a product that doesn't immediately shout, "This is as bad as cigarettes" at you. What product would you think of? Because we may turn our attention to this as well. It's almost a missing words round. But it can be, in fact. Blank needs cigarette-style warnings, says Labour donor. What do you think they're coming for now?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 17 minutes after 10. Thank you, Andy. Describes himself as a Wolfrunian, now resident in Royal Tunbridge Wells. Did you know that there is an MP who's a senior visiting fellow in war studies and an Afghan veteran with a PhD in the same subject as well, sits on the Defence Select Committee? There's a little trivia question for you. He might be worth talking to on this issue. But we'll start with Sam, who's in Crawley. Sam, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, hi, James. It's mainly the idea that I think the reason Joe Biden has done this before Trump comes in is because Trump has affiliations with Russia. Now, when Trump comes in and those affiliations sort of sit in the background, he's going to try and stop the war in Ukraine. It might be the detriment of Ukraine. Now, if
that's close to a given, isn't it? I mean, he's not going to. I don't think he's likely to wade in. Well, we know he's a big admirer of Vladimir Putin's, and there are some fairly robust theories that Putin has Donald Trump in his pocket.
Yeah, I mean, if you've read Seth Abramson's books, I think that, like you say, it is a given. You know, there's a lot of evidence there to suggest that he is under Trump. He is under Putin's thumb. But I think if Biden manages to sort of cross over that line and say that people should be involved in the war as a leader of the free world currently, and that people should aim to allow their munitions to enter Russia, it's sort of pushing the boundary back against Russia before Trump comes in and just signs, a ceasefire or tries to aim for a ceasefire in that region.
Will it make that much difference?
I think so, yeah, because the world will wake up to the fact that they are actually.
But I mean, if Trump is minded to announce a cessation of support or a big winding down of support, Zelensky said this weekend he thinks the war will end sooner as a consequence of Trump coming into the White House. But I don't think he was necessarily suggesting that as being a positive. Then why would adding this to the list of things that he's not going to do anymore make it any harder than the list that's already in place? If you see what I mean.
Kind of. I'll try and untie that a little bit. But it's mainly, again, it's about the novelty of it actually being in a war. So the West understands there is a war going on, whereas China, Russia, they have for the last decade been gearing up and already believing they are in a war. So if we leave it off, and if Trump comes in and says, "Don't worry, we'll take back, we'll give back some Ukraine area to Russia, and then we'll give some Ukraine area to Ukraine," then there's not really a winner within Europe. Putin's probably just made a bit more ground.
And how likely is it that the North Korean angle is pertinent to this decision? Because your explanation excludes it completely, really.
Well, I think that North Korea is quite a big one because obviously they're already supplying munitions to Russia, and they've already signed a pact between Putin and North Korea's ruler that if one goes to war, the other one goes in to help. Now, one thing that Russia don't have at the moment is enough troops, and that's one thing that North Korea can supply. So I think North Korea have a very big say in this.
And it's a sort of, if you'd like, a ramping up of Russia's position while Ukraine continued or would have continued without this decision from Joe Biden on the same sort of footing. So we're looking, I mean, it is, this Liberal Democrat MP, Mike Martin, clearly knows what he's talking about. I'm very impressed by what I've seen of his analysis, but he resorts to capital letters to write, you cannot escalate a genocidal invasion of a neighbouring country where they are kidnapping children and taking them back to Russia. That's what I was sort of clumsily trying to backtrack on at the top of this hour when I said I don't think escalation is actually quite the right word. You can't escalate self-defence. If you're trying to get an invading force out of your own country, you can't escalate. You can just fight harder. You can just resist harder. You can just push back harder. But you can't escalate up to and including sending either missiles or troops into the theatre of war in the hope of pushing your enemies back to the border over which they stepped. Az is in Forest Hill. Az, what do you reckon?
James, good morning. How are you?
Very well indeed. How are you?
Not so bad. James, this whole saga is steeped in a lot of history. It's really difficult to navigate it. Ultimately, what everybody should be asking for is peace to be broken out everywhere. Not more conflict, not more escalation, not more war. That isn't going to happen because of the very nature of the expansion of NATO ever eastwards towards the Russian border. Now, many people know.
I'm familiar with this school of thought, but can we just begin with Vladimir Putin invading Ukraine?
Well, no, we can't do that because then you're not going to have the complete context, and that is then going to blink at everybody to give them the understanding. I mean, if your country has been invaded by Napoleon, by the German Nazis, by Sweden, by Japan, what would you do?
Yeah, see, this is the problem, isn't it? Is I'm just trying to zone in on something that we can meaningfully discuss, and now we're talking about Napoleon.
Well, if you don't know that Napoleon invaded Russia, then you won't have an understanding of why they behaved the way they do.
Everybody knows that Napoleon invaded Russia.
Some people don't, James.
Okay. I mean, I'll try again. So just to steer us towards, let's just focus on one element then, because I'm worried that you will lead us too far away from the phone-in that everybody else is listening to and contributing to. So why has Joe Biden done it now?
Well, nobody can answer that question apart from Joe Biden, but let's postulate why he did it. 2 months ago or so, I think I said to your producer, there was a meeting between Prime Minister of this country and the President at the time to give the President of Ukraine the ability to launch these long-range missiles. So that was cancelled at that time because people told him not to do it at that time. Why is he doing it now? Well, he's an outgoing president. What will happen is the whole mess will be landed on the lap of the incoming president. So is that a good thing?
What do you mean by mess?
Well, if Ukraine launches a missile into Russia, what do you think Russia will do?
What, that it isn't doing already? I don't know. What would it do that it isn't doing already?
Well, if Ukraine launches long-range missiles, that Ukraine doesn't have the tactical ability to launch them. You asked a rhetorical question as if everyone would know the answer when you said, what do you think Russia will do? And I said, I don't know. I mean, bearing in mind a minute ago, you reminded us only Joe Biden could answer that question. So theoretically, only Vladimir Putin could answer. Hang on, let me get my question out before you try not to answer it. Only Vladimir Putin would know what was going to happen next. But let's speculate on that for a minute. You said, what do you think Russia would do as if everybody knows the answer to that question? I don't. What would they do that they're not doing already? What would they do that they're not doing already? They would target those positions that those missiles were launched from, and any ability that was given to launch those missiles would also be targeted.
But they're already bombing all of Ukraine. They're bombing energy infrastructure. They're bombing domestic areas. They're bombing it. I am listening. So what would they do that they're not doing already?
Ukraine do not have the tactical ability to launch those missiles themselves. They would need support from the Europe.
Oh, I think MI6 have intervened because Az was about to blow the whistle on the whole shebang. It's 10:25. So why now? What does it mean? And well, why at all? Lee's in Hitchin. Lee, what do you reckon?
Hello, James.
Hello.
First of all, obviously, we've talked several times in the past. This is the Lee that runs the charity that works in the Children's Hospital and the rehabilitation centres in Ukraine.
Yes, you do amazing work. And I mean, in the first instance, how are things going before we get on to the topic under discussion?
I am more worried. Well, it kind of relates to that topic, actually, because I'm more concerned possibly than I've ever been, because yesterday's all-out missile attack across the entire country was something that we've been anticipating for a number of weeks, and that's part of a strategy to completely destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure with the winter coming. So we face a very difficult winter in Ukraine with power and electricity shortages throughout the very, very cold winter months ahead. And that was very much why yesterday's attack was a full-on assault to try and overwhelm Ukraine's defence systems to take out the energy infrastructure ahead of the winter. And it's very, very worrying and very concerning that across the country, people are going to face a very, very hard winter. And I'm very concerned, obviously, for my people and my friends, etc.
Why the idea that there's anything Russia can do to Ukraine that it isn't doing already is a little bit pie in the sky, which lends support to the idea of what Biden is doing. But I don't imagine you're going to be jumping up and down with joy at this prospect.
I think a lot of Ukrainians are, and Ukrainian supporters are very happy at this news, very happy. Because one of the things that people need to understand is that when, for example, we get air raid alerts in Ukraine,
yes,
there's a process we all follow. Is you get a notification that through your signal channels, Telegram channels, that, for example, say you and I sat here at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night.
Yes.
At about 7 o'clock, we'll get a notification through the various channels that we're all part of that Russian bombers have moved to the airfields and will be taking off in about 4 to 5 hours' time.
Wow.
We know exactly how many bombers are on the airfields. We know how many missiles they're carrying. We know what ships have moved into the Black Sea in order to be able to fire caliber missiles at Ukrainian hospitals and apartment blocks. We know it's coming. We know where they're coming from, and we know how many. And this is why Ukraine needs the ability to strike with inside Russian territory, because we know all of that, and we can't do anything about it. The only thing we can do is wait for those drones and missiles to be over Ukrainian airspace and then try and shoot them down. And there's a phrase that you hear quite a lot in Ukraine is, we need to shoot the archer, not the arrow. And this is really important because those air bases and those missile launch sites are within strike range of the missiles that Ukraine is being authorised to use.
Which is why Russian media is in such uproar, even if they may not put it in those terms. It is because this is, I don't like the phrase game changer, but it's a significant move.
Absolutely. It really is for sure. It really is for sure. And obviously the Americans given permission, unlocks permission for the British Storm Shadow missiles to be used, yes, and other countries' missiles to be used. Because one of the reasons, and I may be speaking out of turn here, but one of the theories, the reasons why the British Storm Shadows and other countries haven't been able to use their missiles is because there are American components on board those missiles. So by the Americans,
I don't think the UK would have acted unilaterally, would we? I don't see. Well, you never know, do you? But I mean, that could be part of it. But this, as you say, this puts them both potentially in the same box, and the Storm Shadows will not be far behind. And that, of course, involves trainers on the ground in Ukraine, US and UK military trainers, showing them how to use the equipment. Why is he doing it now?
That's already happened, obviously.
Yes, more trainers on the ground. Why do you think he's doing it now? Why do you think Biden is doing it now?
I think if I wanted to look at it, a Ukraine situation in isolation, is Biden's looking at it and knows that we cannot defend the Ukrainian energy infrastructure with the air defense systems and a number of missiles that we have.
Yeah.
So allowing those bombers and those launch sites to be targeted allows Ukraine to defend their energy infrastructure through the winter. And hopefully that means that when Trump comes along in January, with whatever that may mean, Ukraine enters January into a much better state than it would otherwise do. And then, of course, there is the Trump issue. Is at the moment, and again, we don't know, he's so unpredictable, but at the moment it certainly looks like that aid from the United States, military aid and financial aid, could be turned off overnight if once Trump is
I think you
inaugurated.
can say, unpredictability notwithstanding, you can say with some confidence he is unlikely to upset Vladimir Putin.
Exactly.
How much of what you've just shared with us have you gleaned from your conversations on the ground in Ukraine?
99% of it, 100%
okay,
of it.
That's really helpful. You know, I've said that to you before. Remind people what the charity is, Lee.
It's a small charity. It's called Fierce Calm, and we work in amputee rehabilitation centres and children's hospitals, and we provide trauma therapy through, I don't like to use the word alternative, let's say holistic practices, so mindfulness, meditation, yoga nidra, which is a form of non-sleep deep rest, to use the scientific term, to help people overcome things like PTSD, anxiety, stress, depression, insomnia, and things like that.
Amazing work that you do. Thank you, Lee. The time is 10:31. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Joe Biden reveals or announces, or it is made known that US missiles, Ukraine will now be free to fire them onto Russian soil. Why has he done this now, and what does it mean? More of your thoughts after the very latest headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:33 is the time. Dear James, writes Paul in Taunton, I am a massive fan, and I agree with 99.9% of everything you say. You know how my mind works. What's the 0.1%? I enjoy history and geopolitics. I am degree educated. I have a professional qualification, and I have travelled to over 40 countries. Do you know what's coming next? He says, I did not know that Napoleon had invaded Russia. Well, we stand correct. What do you think? The 1812 overture, Paul? Tchaikovsky, man? No? The one with the cannons? Okay. Veronica's in Hackney. Veronica, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I'm from Ukraine. I've lived in London a long time, but my family are all there.
Gosh.
So, yeah, I've got a bit of and I'm sorry if I'm a bit incoherent. I've not been sleeping much the last 2 days. There have been a lot of assaults on our country.
Have you made contact with the family? Is everyone?
Yes, but it's just a bit tricky. Yeah, you know, it's always a bit.
Take all the time you want. Take all the time.
Yeah, so, you know, almost 3 years of this kind of. Yeah. Well, I think Biden has decided to do this now in a way to save face, maybe for the Democratic Party, because Ukraine has been constantly asking for permission. And, you know, how Trump said that Zelensky is the biggest sort of beggar, or the biggest, I don't remember exactly the phrasing, but, you know, he goes away, you know, with a deal, you know, all this money and stuff, yes, as if we're doing it for frivolous reasons. We're doing it for the reason that we need to exist. And I think the Democratic Party, and unfortunately Europe as well, have been very slow to respond to our demands and what we needed. We knew what we needed, and we had been voicing those concerns for such a long time, and the aid was always just late, and not in the same amount of like the amount that we needed it in. So it would just be kind of drip, drip, drip. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of criticism of our counteroffensive didn't go as planned, etc. But it's, you know, if you just look at the map, you look at the size of Russia, you look at the population of Russia, you look at Ukraine, we need the help, and we knew exactly what we needed. And unfortunately, I think, we didn't get it at the right time. And I think Biden is now just trying to stay safe and just saying, okay, well, we are finally granting you this permission. Hopefully,
so why do you think it's happened now? Why do you think it's happened now?
Well, because I think Biden doesn't probably have much trust in Trump. And he thinks it's a wild card. It can go, I mean, we in Ukraine as well, we don't really know. He's so unpredictable, Trump. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but he did when he was president back whenever it was, he did strike Assad sort of not nuclear, sorry. There was a case of him striking in Syria after Assad had one of his awful sort of things, and so that was a completely unexpected thing. And
do we know? Do we have a picture, especially perhaps when you speak to people at home? Do we have an idea of what sort of difference this will make? So, in the first instance, we're talking about US-made rockets with a range of about 300 kilometers. Ukraine being given permission to fire those into Russia itself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, to be completely frank, the people that I spoke to yesterday when this was announced, my family and friends, they were actually quite alarmed because they felt that this might mean that Russia just intensifies its attacks on civilian infrastructure as a result. And at this point, your previous caller said, there are a lot of people that are really, happy about this announcement. But I think a lot of people are also actually really concerned.
Well, it's an unsatisfactory phrase, a bit inadequate, but it's more war. And, war, that's what I was talking about earlier, about the speed with which reluctance for more war disappears from the conversation until, of course, I suppose, Veronica, you remind yourself of what the alternatives would be. And especially after this weekend's bombardments, it's hard to picture what an intensification might look like. I wish you well, I really do. I just can't imagine what you're going through, and nor can the massive majority of people listening. Thank you for taking some time to talk to us. 10:38 is the time. Marcus is in Camden. Marcus, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for leading the conversation.
Well, it's your turn now.
I mean, the way I understand it is Biden is as an outgoing president. He already knows what Trump is going to aim for. He knows Putin knows that. So that's his best chance of giving Ukraine like a better hand to deal with in the future. And the reason why he's doing it now, I guess, is because Putin gave him a reason by bringing North Korea into the game. But this is the reason. I think the cause is really Biden wanting to give Ukraine a better chance in the future.
So if in the absence of North Korean forces, this probably wouldn't have happened?
Probably not, which is interesting to me, why Putin would give him a reason to do that. Why would Putin escalate?
Yeah, I think because, as an earlier caller alluded to, because there is a genuine shortage of troops.
Correct.
So he'll take them from wherever he can find them. Yeah,
exactly. So exactly, I think that's what it is. I think Putin found himself in a bit of a back foot with this shortage, so he needed to do something. And that gave Biden the reason to do it.
And what will it mean? Do we know?
It remains to be seen. We don't know. I think it will depend on how effective those missiles will be in the end, and whether or not we'll give Ukraine a better hand, basically, to get a better deal.
And this is the point, essentially, that Zelensky himself has made, as you, Marcus, probably know. He said, "Today there is a lot of talk in the media about us receiving permission for respective actions." It's a living, Volodymyr. Come on. What else are we supposed to do? But he goes on, strikes are not carried out with words. Such things are not announced. Missiles will speak for themselves. They certainly will. So Zelensky showing no sign of losing his commitment to the fight, as you'd probably expect on a day like today. And again, just for people just joining us, the detail's important. US President, it is in his gift to allow Ukraine to use US-made rockets. They have a range of about 300 kilometers. The decision is being justified by the presence of North Korean troops fighting alongside Russia against Ukraine. And as things stand, the permission extends to the Kursk region, where Russian and North Korean forces are gathered. So, too little, too late maybe was a slightly crass description of things at the beginning, but as you've heard, the idea that, or the question of why this wasn't done sooner, perhaps is answered by the presence of North Korea. Anthony's in Bletchley Park. Anthony, what would you like to say?
James, good morning to you.
Hello, mate.
Doctrinally, a threat's got two components, a capability and an intent. And Biden has now harnessed US missile capability to Ukrainian intent. To answer your two questions, why have they allowed it? Well, Pentagon and the state will have war games, literally, along with the UK, this particular scenario. That takes a hell of a lot of time. This wasn't a snap decision. And the reason I'm interested in that is because the timing of the Russian strike on Ukrainian infrastructure is, in intelligence terms, highly suspicious, because it came a day before Biden declared that US weaponry could be used in Russian territory.
So you think they knew it was coming?
My view is that it's very likely there's a Russian intelligence attack on Washington established Biden had already changed his mind, so Russia launched a preemptive strike. And that then leads us to the why now, because if Biden releases the authority to use those weaponry, he allows Ukraine to cause as much damage or the threat of damage to Russian infrastructure within that weapon envelope range before the handover of power from Biden to Trump in January 25, and that will, in the interim, over the next 7 weeks, increase political pressure on Moscow ahead of Trump's arrival. And that's my theory, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, it's probably more than a theory. It's close to having some of the trappings of Occam's razor, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, I think so.
All the available facts, the theory that best fits them is probably the truth. What do we know about the impact it will have on the ground? I mean, how much damage might or will be done to Russian forces or indeed Russian positions?
I would be stating a falsehood if I said I knew exactly what the envelope.
Does, do they?
If I knew what the weapons envelope was with the targets are in range. However, what I would say is that I'm well aware through contacts that Ukrainian intelligence and military intelligence are exceptionally good at their jobs. They will have identified a series of targets which will have gone back to Moscow and London and said, look, if you give us authority to use Storm Shadow, this is the impact we can create.
Right.
And that will also have been wargamed by the FSB and the SVR in Russia, and they will know what the likely impact will be. And there's two aspects of impact. There's not only the physical impact of a missile slamming into a generator or a power plant and bringing it down, it's what it does to the local population. If the Russians are being fed on this gruel from Putin, that there's no way that the dastardly West is going to be allowed to attack us, because we have right on our side, and then suddenly storm shadows start appearing out of the gloom and taking down power stations, it's going to cause them a propaganda problem. It's going to cause them a PR problem, and that can be exploited by Ukraine.
Well, yes, and perhaps a scale of the worries that they're already feeling is contained within this quote. I don't know if you've seen it, from Vladimir Zhabarov, the first deputy head of the Russian Upper House's International Affairs Committee. This is a very big step, he said last night, towards the start of World War III.
Well, they always say that.
But one day it might be true. One day it might be true, just because they always say it.
And of course, your response is precisely the one that they want to hear. Because the more people who suddenly turn around and go, and then please don't get me wrong, this is not a comment on you.
Sure.
As soon as we go into Chamberlain appeasement mode and say, oh, well, actually, do we really want to start World War III? All you've got to do is look at the lessons of history from 1914 and 1939 and say, well, unless you actually do stand up to these people, guess what happens? They roll over borders.
And do you know that answers a question Richard asked a little earlier? Why does no one ever speak about the Budapest memorandum on security assurances? This was in 1994, and it saw Ukraine give up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for security assurances from the United States, the UK, and Russia. Why is this never discussed? To which the answer is Crimea, isn't it? I mean, it kind of got.
I think it is. Yeah. And also, it's embarrassing because if people start going around digging up treaties which prove that we've got international responsibilities that we have so far eschewed, who knows where that rabbit hole that's going to take us down to.
Yes, you're not wrong. But again, as you say, the idea of this causing all sorts of problems for Russia above and beyond what the impact on the ground might be is probably exacerbated by the prospect of Donald Trump arriving in the White House. Thank you, Anthony. Well, I said it before, I say it again. If you build it, they will come. Fantastic calls today. And it's not over yet.
James O'Brien on LBC.
48, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It always happens at about the same time, doesn't it, during winter? I come back from a break and I got that weird little tickle. I presume you like me to keep you up to date with these developments. I'm not going to start describing my bunions live on the radio or anything like that, but if you're wondering why strange noises are coming out of your speaker, I think the least I can do is explain, but it seems to be in abeyance now. 10:48 is the time. We found that MP. We're going to talk to him shortly, and thank you to a couple of listeners who brought him to my attention, but Mike Martin, the Liberal Democrat MP for Tunbridge Wells. Who else was going to run in Tunbridge Wells? Wasn't someone else going to run in Tunbridge? Hang on. Nope, it's gone. Also has an extraordinary record in this field and newly arrived in Parliament in the seat vacated, of course, by Greg Clark. He sits already on the Defence Select Committee, I think. I think he's going to be quite an interesting contributor. We'll squeeze him in before 11. But first, Alex is in Kingston. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm from Ukraine as well. Have been here for many years. My theory is why Biden is doing it now, because he really has nothing to gain from this, personally.
Yeah.
I think he is simply giving Trump a leverage over Putin, because if Trump wants to sit Putin and Zelensky down, or more broadly Ukraine and Russia, to negotiate the end of this, and I think he does want it, genuinely. He needs a leverage over two parties, right? That's just negotiation 101, so to speak. He has a leverage over Ukraine already, which is, if you don't negotiate, I will stop the weapon supplies.
Yes.
He needs one over Russia, and this, it's not like a massive leverage, but it's big enough, right? Because now a lot of Russia proper, internationally recognized Russia, will be within range. So strategic bombers are not going to be within range because they're too far from Ukraine. But all the tactical airfields, a lot of concentration of troops, a lot of military infrastructure like weapon warehouses and so on, they will be within range now. And that puts a lot of pressure on their logistics and everything. I seriously doubt Biden has allowed Ukraine to strike into civilian infrastructure with American weapons, because that would be...
no, it's just the North Korean and the Russian positions in Kursk, isn't it, I think? And that's where the permission...
Not necessarily only in Kursk. There is also Belgorod and Bryansk region around Ukraine, and they're all within region. Within range. Particularly North Korean troops. I don't think Putin cares too much about Korean troops,
no,
to be honest. He cares more about his airfields and about his soldiers and about his weapon dumps and so on.
So you following these events more closely than most people in this country will be doing, given your nationality. And it's hard to know what adjectives and verbs to use, isn't it? Because we are talking about war, but you are encouraged by this development.
The thing is, the feeling in Ukraine at the moment is this has to end. And as much as I hate Trump for all his, politics,
yes,
this one thing, I think he is on the money. It has to end, right?
Yes.
Too many people have died. I don't think he cares actually about Ukrainian people as such. He cares about brownie points for himself.
Of course.
I think he aims for...
But it doesn't matter, does it? The end justifies that. It doesn't matter why he's doing it if what he's doing actually is what you want.
Exactly, yes. So it has to end. Ukraine survived. There are Ukrainian flags over all but 3 major Ukrainian cities. People are going around their business and working and paying taxes. This has to end. Ukraine has to start rebuilding, right?
And do you think this brings the end closer, but also an end which sees a restoration of Ukraine's pre-invasion borders?
That I don't think that will happen within near future.
Okay. All right. So it accelerates some sort of conclusion, but not necessarily the conclusion that Zelensky wants, which may be why he said the thing he said about Trump's arrival in the White House, precipitating a quicker end to the war. Alex, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And I can only imagine, again, as with Veronica, what it is like to have family there on the receiving ends of these bombardments this weekend being particularly bloody and vicious. 10:53 is the time. If you build it, they will come. Mike Martin, the newish Liberal Democrat MP for Tunbridge Wells, member of the Defence Select Committee. A rare honour, Mike, that you're here, because many of my listeners told me that you were someone that we should be talking to on a day like today. So your reputation precedes you. Why now? Why now, do you think? Why has Biden done what he's done now, given that many people, I think perhaps you included, would have liked to have seen some sort of similar action much sooner?
This is a long story throughout the conflict. They have, decided that they weren't going to give anti-armor missiles, artillery, tanks, fighter jets, longer range artillery, and now these permissions to use weapons in Russia. And each time they said they're not going to do it because it's escalatory, and then they've gone and done it anyway. And to do it now, at this point during the transition where Trump's already said, look, we think both sides should not escalate. We think we're going to try and get a deal here. Trump is a man who is well known for reversing the decisions of his predecessors just because he doesn't like his predecessors, just because he's making the point that he's in charge now. I find this a kind of utterly bizarre. And I have to say, and these are quite strong words you'll recognise coming from someone on the Defence Select Committee, it's the end of a long period of pretty feckless US policy towards Ukraine.
Which is, I think, summed up in a thread you've written this morning, that policy, that fecklessness, as essentially voluntarily ceding military advantage to Russia by delaying capability uplifts to Ukraine. And you go a little further, though. You say it is absolutely criminal.
Yeah. Well, I think what, because of that thing that I've just described, where they've sort of spoken about some particular type of weapon system they're going to give Ukraine, and then saying, oh, we're not going to do it because it's escalatory. In 2022, initially everyone thought, oh, Russia's going to win. And then within a few months, it became quite clear that actually it wasn't at all clear that Russia was going to win, and Ukraine was on the front foot. And there was a moment there where Russia was on its back. They hadn't announced these massive mobilizations. The Russian military now is bigger than it was in February 2022, right? It is larger. They've recruited more people. And successively, we've lost these moments where we could have gained advantage or pressed the advantage on Russia by the delaying of all these types of equipment. And each individual one doesn't necessarily mean anything. Like these permissions here, these ATACMs, is not going to change the price of fish. But taken together, all of these things, and particularly the signals that it sends to Russia, is just all wrong. The Americans have been playing it all wrong.
Gosh. I suppose the geopolitical pendulum now swings, especially come January, swings back towards Europe, and it makes Starmer's stated ambition at the G20, whether he's on his way now, to prioritise support for Ukraine quite urgent then.
I think so. And I think from the point of view of the UK, I mean, obviously European allies really need to step up now. And we've sort of seen Germany announce it was going to give 100 billion, but then it pulled back and said, well, actually, they're sort of, they now the government's collapsed. And so we're not sure what's going on there. So the European allies need to do much more. But the UK has this key opportunity. We've just got a new government in. We're just launching a strategic defence review. This is the opportunity for the UK to say, right, we are no longer a global military. We are going to focus on deterring Russia and, if necessary, defeating it. And alongside that, we're going to increase the amount of money that we spend on the military, because at the moment, probably you'd need about £20 billion to recapitalise the British military. Like, that's how large the gaps are in our capability envelope. And it's those three things: focus on Russia, work with European allies, and spend more, recapitalise British defence. These are the things that are absolutely necessary right now, where we have a president coming into the White House who is an isolationist and who's already said that NATO is not worth the paper it's written on, and Russia, quote, can do the hell what it likes.
That is quite a chilling quote. Final question, Mike. What are the potential ramifications of failing to defeat Russia or failing to deter Russia from either the European or the British perspective?
I think there's probably three things that we need to worry about. The first is that if some sort of grubby deal's done where we give half of Ukraine to Russia, that will embolden Russia. And so then the Baltic states, who we've all pledged to defend through NATO and under Article 5, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, are under grave threats. That's the first thing. The second thing is about nuclear proliferation. And effectively, Russia has acted like a nuclear bully over the last few months, the last few years, saying, well, if you do that, we'll escalate. And what this does is it signals to countries like Iran that if you get nuclear weapons, you can do what you like. And the third thing is Taiwan and the South China Sea, because the Chinese are watching very carefully at how well the West holds together and what the West's backbone is like when dealing with aggressors. And so if we let the Russians get away with whatever they want to get away with in Ukraine, we might as well give up on Taiwan and the other elements in the South China Sea that China's got its eye on.
Gosh, yeah, the strength of the West's backbone.
This is really, 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 this is the moment, James. This is 1934.
Mike, thank you. That was incredibly helpful and a testament as well to the impact you've already made as a politician, that 3 or 4 of my listeners were already telling me to get you on the programme. As Bob says, the electorate of Tunbridge Wells have voted wisely. I think. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. That was Mike Martin, MP. Also, as you could probably have gathered, a visiting fellow, a senior visiting fellow on war studies, an author on the subject of conflict, and latterly a member of the Defence Select Committee in the House of Commons. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's back to purely domestic, or almost purely domestic matters next, with plans for farmers to protest in London tomorrow over the requirement to pay half as much in inheritance tax as is due on all other estates of a similar size. I want to have, if we can, I don't want to say nuanced, but I want to have an informative conversation, which means all the pressure is on you.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You're always conscious as a radio phone-in host of that time when Alan Partridge upset all the farmers, and no one wants to do that. And similarly, when the Labour government, the incoming or the newly installed Labour government, announced that it was taking away the winter fuel allowance for many, many pensioners, a huge majority of old age pensioners, I suggested to you that we were possibly paying attention to the wrong thing, and that what we should see it as is an indication of where they are prepared to go in pursuit of the funds that they need. One of the strangest... what's the word I want? One of the strangest elements of current political discourse is the constant carping's the wrong word. I've written a blooming book about it. Is the constant description of infrastructural collapse. You know, we're all pretty clear that things ain't what they used to be. Whether you're talking about NHS waiting lists, whether you're talking about, as Mike Martin just reminded us, a diminished military, whether you're talking about courts in a state of absolute constipation, all of these things are down to funding. All of these things are consequences of austerity and with a side order of pandemic, one of which was a matter of policy, one of which was obviously not. And so this discourse whereby we all agree that something must be done runs parallel with another right-wing media-inspired discourse that how dare they seek money with which to pay for it. You can get, distracted. And sometimes those distractions are deliberate. You can get distracted by arguments about whether or not the systems are as efficient as they could be. You know, the civil service is sclerotic. The NHS is badly run. It's a lie, by the way, just for the record, to claim that the NHS has too many managers by any metric, under almost any comparison. If anything, the opposite is true. But when you are a right-wing pundit trying to persuade people to vote against their own interests, what do you want? Less money for the NHS. Where do you go when you're sick or when your mum gets cancer? Well, the NHS. What do you want again? Less money for the NHS. Taxes, NHS. So you've got to give people like a chew toy is probably a good way of describing it. I used to describe it as a fig leaf, but fig leaf doesn't quite work. It's a chew toy. You've got to give people a chew toy, something they can sort of gnaw on. So sort of focused on gnawing on the chew toy, they get distracted from the actual facts. So you saw it probably reach its apotheosis during Brexit debates when people would talk about the laws that they didn't want to obey or they need us more than we need that. All those like slightly at best flabby and at worst completely fatuous statements that everyone from David Davis and Daniel Hannan onwards was throwing into the ether without really having the first idea what they were talking about. They were chew toys. Great, chewing away on something, which spares you the difficulty of having to think about things. And so, when it comes to funding for the NHS, the idea that there's too many managers. I'll give you the best example of a chew toy. One of the best examples of the last time. Gordon Brown sold all the gold. So we're having a conversation about Trident, or we're having a conversation about NHS waiting lists, or we're having a conversation about the log jams in the legal system, or the underfunding of the police, or the collapse of morale in teaching, and the pay constraints placed on doctors, or we're having a conversation about train drivers. And someone will always, without fail, text me to say, Gordon Brown sold all the gold. And that's a chew toy which has been served up, has been delivered by the kind of people that told you Brexit would be a good idea. Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy. Liz Truss would be a brilliant prime minister. Austerity was a wonderful notion, utterly necessary. Oh, and we forget sometimes that you mustn't blame the bankers for the international banking collapse of 2008. As the great Alexei Sayle once explained, that was clearly caused by there being too many libraries in Wolverhampton. So you get these chew toys. I don't know where the chew toys are at the moment with regard to inheritance tax for farmers. I don't quite know how it lands. I don't know why an ordinary person would be particularly exercised by farmers returning to the scenario they enjoyed up to 1984. In fact, I think that the new system of inheritance tax on farms may be more generous to farmers than what was in place prior to 1984. I heard a caller this morning to Nick talking about a £4.5 million farm upon which the farmer was earning a salary, apparently, of £25,000 a year, to which I'm afraid there is only one response, isn't there? You'd make more money putting it in the post office. It's just ridiculous. I hate to say it, but you must be either a really, really bad farmer or the most unlucky person on the planet. A £4.5 million estate yielding an income of £25,000 a year. If it was a school, it would be in special measures. If it was any other sort of business, it would have gone bankrupt long ago. Look, the numbers are interesting, but that's an example of perhaps one extreme that is being put forward. The tax expert Dan Needle's been very good on this, and the way it works, and the estimates of how many farms are going to be affected vary slightly. But if you're listening and you're worried about this, if you put your farm in your children's hands now and you stay alive for another 7 years, you'll be golden. You'll be completely excused from the tax, full stop. If you are going to be required to pay it, you will pay it on what your estate is worth in excess of a threshold, which will be £1 million if there's one of you. But if you're still with the person with whom you produced an heir, then it can rise to as much as £3 million. So estimated to affect perhaps 500 farms a year. The huge, huge majority of farms will not be affected. Two prominent figures in public life, James Dyson and Jeremy Clarkson, have both gone on the record to explain that they invested in farmland precisely because they sought to avoid the death duties that would be payable on other incomes. Clarkson, incredibly, I missed this at the time, went a little bit further and wrote of a sinister plan to ethnically cleanse British farmland and ethnically cleanse the. Jeremy Clarkson has accused the government of ethnically cleansing the British countryside to make way for immigrant towns on farmland, an intervention of quite extraordinary irresponsibility. But whether it was his intention or not, anybody who understands anything could perhaps have explained to him how that would go down with the far right. And we're already reading reports this morning that they plan to infiltrate, for want of a better word, possibly join the protests that are due to take place in London tomorrow. So if you're wondering why, there at least is part of your answer. So where does the truth lie on an issue like this? Where does the truth lie? £3 million worth of farm exempt from all inheritance tax. £3.5 million worth of farm, 20% tax due on the £500,000. All right, so £100,000, which you can pay over a period of 10 years. So you've got to find 10 grand a year in death duties on a £3.5 million farm. I'll say that again. You've got to find 10 grand a year in death duties on a £3.5 million farm. I read the coverage so that you don't have to in places like the Daily Telegraph, and it is, well, it seems to me, deliberately missing or deliberately leaving out, omitting is the word I was looking for, isn't it? Deliberately omitting some of the facts that are in place here. So you've got a rough estimate, a top level of about 500 farms a year being affected by this. and 20,000 farmers preparing to stage a rally outside Parliament tomorrow. There's a 20% levy on inherited agricultural land. So that's inherited agricultural land. Kicks in at 1 million if you're on your own, up to 3 million spouse to spouse, then parent to child. It's 3 million before any inheritance tax will be payable. I've read editorials that completely omit this sort of information. And if it appears at all, it appears only in quotes provided by politicians, government politicians, in this case, Sir Keir Starmer. So although the NFU has publicly urged its members not to go on strike, some farmers are already threatening to do so anyway. I'll read that again. A typical case, a parent with a farm, they want to pass it on to one of their children. By the time you've taken into account not only the exemption for the farm property itself, so it's only the land, but also the exemption for spouse to spouse, then parent to child, you're looking at £3 million worth of estate before any inheritance tax will be payable. I don't think that this is understood by a lot of the people getting angry about the proposal. And listen, this is an awful thing to say, really, but I think, and I say it only because I'm such a student of right-wing media, and as Daddy Pig would say, I'm a bit of an expert on how successful they are at persuading people to believe things that aren't true, and crucially, of course, to vote in favour of wealth as opposed to in favour of labour with a small L. I don't think a lot of farmers realise the actual facts and reality of this issue. I think we can use inheritance tax as a very blunt instrument to upset everybody, but hardly anybody pays it. To qualify to pay inheritance tax, and obviously there's some geographical anomaly here because of the price of property, but to qualify to pay inheritance tax, you've got to be already among the wealthiest people in the country. And the idea that you use their example to make people who won't ever be required to pay it rebel against the requirement to pay it is, well, it's a great example of what Aneurin Bevan was talking about, isn't it? When he talked about the whole project of the 20th Century Conservative Party is to persuade poverty to use its political power to protect wealth. Wealth uses its wealth to persuade poverty. I prefer Labour in the context of this description, but poverty is what Bevan talked about. So you're essentially persuading poor people to use their political power to protect the wealth of rich people. I used to read that as a kid and think it was a bit naive or think it was a bit out of date. I think, I'm glad things have improved now. But my goodness me, can you think of a better distillation of what's happened in this country in the last 10 years than wealth using its wealth to persuade poor people to use their political power to support the interests of the very wealthy, to support the interests of the rich. Now, a bit like the private education debate, some people who qualify to pay inheritance tax will not consider themselves to be rich, but they will only pay it on the parts of their estate that are above the threshold, and the threshold roughly doubles if it is handed from spouse to spouse before surviving spouse hands to child. So there are all sorts of injustices in place in this system, up to and including the royal family, who don't pay any duties at all on all of their land because of the nature of duchies and trusts. If I say duchy, how many people think of Musical Youth? Is that just me? Even now, was it 30 years later, 40 years later, I want to pass the duchy on the left-hand side. It is 11.6. I don't think anyone knew what that meant when they appeared on Top of the Pops in the early 1980s. But I digress, as I always do. Who do we need to talk to about this? I'm going to open up the phone lines. Supermarkets need a slap, metaphorically speaking. They've been treating farmers appallingly for ages. And the idea that farmers should... two things seem to me to be really central to this conversation, right? The first is this. Up until 1984, farms managed, and you could tell me that incomes were much higher back then, or that the nature of farming has changed, to which I'd respond like a Tory, I think. And I would say, well, then you must respond to the change. You know, I'm not a Tory, that's not fair. I respond to a business-friendly politician. If the facts change, you have to change. You know, if the country votes to leave the European Union, We rely on business people to deal with all the extra red tape, to deal with all the extra inconvenience, to deal with all the extra costs. We know that some of it will be passed on to us, but the businesses that survive will be the businesses that deal with it best and pass on as little as possible of the cost to us. Okay, so point number one, up until 1984, they coped. And I think up until 1984, the system didn't give them a special dispensation. And then the second bit is, I think, quite crucial, really. It's still half of what everybody else handing on a business would be required to pay. So you've still got on that in excess, that the amount over £3 million, you've still got a 50% discount on what you would have to pay on that compared to everybody else. So I think the problem is this. Pass the duchy to the firstborn son, writes Ollie, rather winningly. That'd be quite a cover version, wouldn't it? I think that here is the thing. It is almost inconceivable to see people in possession of estates worth in excess of £3 million as being in need of more protection or support. But it doesn't mean it's not true, all right? Maybe there is something going on here that the Labour Party have miscalculated massively. Maybe farmers in possession of land worth in excess of £3 million are too poor to pay a half of the inheritance tax that any other comparable business inheritor would be required to pay. Maybe, but I mean, if that is true, how rude would it be to suggest that there's something very wrong with the business? I heard an amazing farmer on Farming Today, which is one of my favourite radio programmes, would you believe, on Farming Today about a month ago. And he had absolutely met the challenge of the changing nature of farming. He kept some arable and he kept some livestock, but they'd become almost a centrepiece of a much bigger project, which involved tempting as many members of the public onto his land. A direct refutation of the traditional image of farmers who were often portrayed in the popular media as screaming, "Get off my land," incomers and dog walkers. So this fellow, I wish I could remember his name, but someone will send it to me in a minute. Everything from having a massive pumpkin patch in the run-up to Halloween, you'd come and cut your own pumpkin, and I think they had pumpkin carving classes. He had a massive soft play area that he'd pay, so people would come to he's just a brilliant business person who happens to be a farmer. And if you're only making 25 grand off an estate worth £4 million, I think you're in the wrong business. So is there really a case here? Do the farmers really need defending? They're going to protest tomorrow. I'm sure that the right-wing media will treat them with exactly the same levels as contempt and derision that they treated the Just Stop Oil protesters and all the environmental activists. But why are we supposed to feel sorry for these farmers? 0345 6060 973. And remember, it's that £3 million in most cases, and £1 million if you're a lone parent passing it on to an heir or an heiress. I don't quite get, what are we supposed to feel for them that we're being told to feel? Hit the numbers now. You will get through, all right? 0345 6060 973. And I've heard lots of phone-ins on this subject conducted backwards. The massive, massive majority of the country, I presume, don't quite understand what all the fuss is about here. Why are the farmers getting such special treatment from A, the media, and B, the media? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. So I suppose, and it was quite a roundabout introduction now. I know you're used to it by now, but let me apologise. Here's what I want to know. I'm a great believer in wealth using its wealth to persuade poverty or workers to use their political power to protect wealth. But I'm not 100% sure that it's fair to apply that equation to the inheritance tax for farmers issue. I think it's fair, but I'm not 100%. And this isn't just because I'm frightened of doing a partridge and upsetting all the farmers. I mean, I don't want to sound like a complete wombat, but I do actually have a lot of friends back at home, back in Worcestershire, who are farmers. Although most of them did not inherit the family farms. They didn't fancy the lifestyle It was backbreaking and incredibly difficult unless you were a kind of unless you had a huge operation, a quasi-industrial operation, the old days of being up at the crack of dawn and working until the last shreds of sunlight and then moving into the barn. I mean, it was absolutely backbreaking. I have nothing but respect for the people that do it. But some of these numbers don't fit that idea. Is it fair to apply the Bevin pincers to the farmers' inheritance tax? Is this yet another effort by wealth, i.e. right-wing media, to persuade poverty, i.e. the rest of us, to use our political power to protect wealth? Etty's in Kentish Town. Etty, what do you think?
I think you're maybe asking the wrong question.
Next caller, please. Carry on. Go on then. Everyone's a flipping expert.
So I know very little about farming, but I think it's not whether it's fair or not. It's what are the consequences of this policy. And it seems to me that one of the consequences will probably be that you have fewer medium-sized farms in existence. And as those farmers have to pay their inheritance tax, fine, that land passes either to bigger institutional farmers, so kind of corporations, or becomes more like your pumpkin patch type thing. And that's fine, that's profitable. But that's
we're talking,
not really farmland.
We're describing £3.5, 4, £5 million estates as being medium-sized farms.
Yeah, and I suspect in farming terms they probably are. And look, whether or not you think that's fair or not is a different question. Do you want farming as an institution, or farming as an industry, to carry on in this country with farmers who are of roughly that size? Well,
this reminds me, I often speak, and this will sound a little odd, but hedgerows in Switzerland were a seminal moment in my political development, because I remember reading or hearing that and I don't even know if it's true anymore, but the government subsidises farmers in Switzerland to keep their hedgerows nice, because it adds to the the general pleasantness of the country, of the land, and that's a kind of entry level example of what you would call intangible value. So tangible value would be things like food security and food supply. Intangible values would be stewardship of the countryside. You follow the work of someone like James Rebanks, which I heartily recommend, the shepherd and author who works up in the Lake District, extraordinarily informed on things like sustainability and rewilding and the importance of looking after the land for the next generation, not just of your own family, but of the entire country. But I don't think anybody sees a £3 million, well, first of all, most £3 million farms would be fine. I think this is more likely to split them up rather than see them all consolidated into massive ones. So if it's small farms you like, this is the policy for you.
No, I'm saying it's a farm that's quite big, but still capable of being farmed by individuals or families, which seems to be what the £3 million farms are. Now, it may be the case that you don't care about that, and that's fine, and then you end up with a load of much, much smaller farms. I suspect it's more difficult to make a smaller farm profitable, like in a traditional sense, and that's fine if that's what you want the outcome of the policy.
If you can't, I mean, I suppose, I think I am, for the record, asking the right question, but I suppose the stumbling block, wouldn't I? The stumbling block here is the idea of a massive business worth that kind of sum producing so little money. You know, if it's true that you're paying yourself 25 grand a year on a £4.5 million business, you should sell it now and stick it in the post office, and either give it to someone who can make a decent profit on that level of asset, or have a complete rethink about how you're farming it.
But do you necessarily always want people to profit maximise?
Not maximise. I just want them to make enough to pay half of the inheritance tax that all the other business people in the country have to pay.
But then that is profit maximising. It's not necessarily.
It's not maximising. No, if you've got a £4.5 million business and you're paying yourself 25 grand a year, that's the bit I can't get my head around. It makes me feel very sorry for the person on 25 grand a year, but also I think they might be a bit silly, because the alternative's in front of you, and also to pay the inheritance tax, just sell £500,000 worth of land, and you're golden. We shall see whether or not there is an elephant in the room that we are missing. One thing I'm going to say is that and this comes from James O'Brexit, so it counts, all right? It doesn't matter whether they voted for Brexit or not. In fact, if you dig into the research that has been done, the spread is roughly proportionate among farmers, as it was for the rest of the country. They skewed slightly towards Leave, but they were by no means marching into the voting booths in their gumboots and sticking a cross in the Leave box willy-nilly. And I tell you why we got the idea, and I speak as someone who made this mistake. I speak as someone who got this wrong and has subsequently looked into the actual numbers, looked into the research. Because so many signs were put up in farmland that we all presumed all the farmers wanted to leave the European Union. I haven't yet got to the bottom of why there were so many signs put up in farmland, but there were. So we drove around the countryside, particularly I was spending a lot of time in Norfolk at the time. Everywhere, signs everywhere. So I think we all came away by a form of osmosis, believing that all the farmers were voting to leave the European Union. But even if they had, they voted to make themselves poorer, and then to make them poorer still would be a nonsensical response. It would just be spiteful to say, well, they made themselves poorer by voting to leave the European Union, so we're going to vote to make them even poorer. I just think that's mean, unless, again, I'm missing something there. We'll find out after the headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11. I just feel that something's missing, and it may be my fault. It may be that applying that old and a timeless adage of Aneurin Bevan's about wealth and poverty does not apply to farmers and inheritance tax, but that leaves two problems. They are still getting a much, much better deal than the inheritors of any comparable estates, and up until I think 1984, they paid inheritance tax and managed and survived. So, well, I've set the stall out. You just ring in and fill your boots. Peter has from Ashbourne. Peter, what would you like to say?
Right there, James. You are missing something, actually, which is actually your build-up. And that is, it's been completely overlooked, something called capital appreciation. So this farmland, this mystic farmland that's 3.5 million, are you telling me in 10 years' time it's not going to increase in value? So paying £10,000 a year, it's not a
great phone line, and you just use the word genius to describe a policy, which always makes my ears prick up. I don't know if you've moved where you were since you spoke to the producer. I'll give you a chance to get yourself on a slightly better footing, and I'll come back to you after we've spoken to James in Uxbridge. James, with how much alacrity should we be reaching for our violins at the moment regarding farmers?
So hi, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller. I think on this one, I suppose there's a couple of factors here. The bit I think they're missing is to almost have a minimum acreage in this as well before you start applying the tax. Because for almost as the last caller was saying, in a sense, the farmer has no control.
Have you got the radio on in the background?
No, I shouldn't do.
Oh, that's all right. Who's that then? Who's that shooting their mouth off while we're trying to have a conversation?
Oh, I don't know. I'm near a tunnel.
Okay, carry on.
So I think that in a sense the farmer has had no control that land has appreciated. That's something out of their sort of control. Equally, they don't really have much control on the price that they get paid from the land and the yield. So ultimately, as you said, they might be better off selling the farm, put it in the post office and make 4%, and they get a better living. But farming is something that's in the blood for a lot of people.
Yes.
And it's a case of, and as you say, the value to society of those people having the farm is also, again, for the food, it's also better than just sort of plopping it in the post office for 4% a year. So I think if you had some sort of minimum acreage where you sort of recognise that you need 300-400 acres to get a viable living, and you say 25-50 grand a year, and after that point you start applying the inheritance tax, so that the medium-sized farmers still have a chance of surviving, and your James Dyson pays his.
They would say that this is actually what they've done, albeit they're looking at how much it's worth. So, and that's land, that's agricultural land. So acreage versus cost, I don't really see what difference it would make.
Well, what I would say is, in a sense, if the acreage is 400 acres to maintain the farm and get you a living, that land, by the time this kicks in, your farm might have appreciated again another 3 million. But in a sense, then you still need 400 acres to give yourself.
But it's never money until you sell. I think that might be part of the reason why it doesn't feel quite as clean cut as some commentary would allow. But then other people to pay inheritance, even blinking aristocrats have to flog a Rubens or something, don't they? Or give their house to the National Trust because death duties can be so punitive. That's the ones who haven't deployed trusts and lawyers to avoid all of their responsibilities to the population. Thank you, James. Hopefully Peter on a better line. We've just got to you describing it as an act of genius, Peter. Tell me more.
Yes, so the gentleman that's just been on has mentioned what I was mentioning, which is capital appreciation.
Yes.
So this is why I think it's genius, because the price of land is always going to go up. So your analysis, and forgive me for pointing this out to you, was slightly...
Sorry, everyone's a critic today, mate. I'll roll with it.
No, but in your build-up, right, you were saying, 10 grand a year, over 10 years, on a £3 million farm. Well, but people are forgetting is that the price of that farm is going to go up. If it goes up, then that 10 grand a year is less than 10 grand a year. If it goes up by...
I see what you mean. Yes.
This is why I think it's a great piece of taxation, because it's fair. It's taxing people that have got plenty. I mean, I'm not going to mention Clarkson and Dyson. We all know why they are.
You just did. You can't do that. You can't say I'm not going to mention Clarkson and Dyson while you're literally mentioning them.
but you know what I'm saying, mate.
Don't mention the war. Peter, don't mention the war.
Okay, I definitely will not mention... Yeah.
Good.
So,
so is that why? Is that why the story has run away? Because because the Aneurin Bevan analysis does apply. It is we're being led to believe that there's going to be some poor fella there making soup out of his socks, sitting on a £4 million estate because he couldn't possibly meet the requirements that are half of what would be required if it was any business other than a farm. We're being a little bit misled by this, or are there people? Because there's always, with thresholds and criteria, there are always people who are just a millimetre to the wrong side of it, aren't there?
Of course there are. However, on a more serious note, you said something in your build-up which scared the bejesus out of me, which is the right wing are mooted to be...
Not the right wing, mate, the far right. It's an important distinction to make. I appreciate it's a distinction that seems to be getting quite blurred at the moment, but we're talking about the far right.
Yes, okay, I stand corrected.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's what's really serious. There's far more important things for people to be worried about. A piece of legislation has come in that's absolutely fair. I'm one of those people that sent my kids to private school, so I fall into that category. And it's like, right, okay, VAT on school fees, yeah, great, and this is fair too.
It's got to come from somewhere. It's got to come from somewhere, hasn't it? And, you can bang on about Gordon Brown selling the gold, or I'm surprised no one's mentioned foreign aid yet. Well, they probably have in the broader discourse. Foreign aid, why don't we stop all foreign aid? But in the real world, you're right, it is fair, whether it's genius or not. It's very much in the eye of the beholder. If you think we're exaggerating, me or Peter, I can tell you that the former leader of the British National Party, a peculiar individual called Nick Griffin, posted a picture of himself in Jeremy Clarkson's pub this weekend, accompanied by the caption, "Jeremy Clarkson nails it." So if you're a subscriber to the idea that you can judge a man by the fans that he attracts, then, well, there's your case study. Thank you, Peter. John's in Croydon. John, what made you pick up the phone?
Do you know what it is? Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
For me, you make this point about maximising profits.
Not maximising. Not maximising, because maximising profits might... just if you honestly can't afford to pay half of what other businesses would be required to pay on an estate worth in excess of £3 million, then I'm just cautiously suggesting you might be doing things a tiny bit wrong.
Okay, but look, the perspective that I'm coming from with it, James, is that this, for me, the way that you are going to claim less through the inheritance that you would of others, that, for me, is a down payment on our food security for those who would be most affected by a price increase, being the poor. Now, you could say that these farmers could stomach that, and then
you could say that about their clothes, you could say that about their heating, you could say that about their carpets, you could say that about their furniture, all necessities.
But when we're particularly talking about this, is that basically, in order to make food output and production at the most beneficial way for their profits, that comes at odds to the government's legislation and how they want to meet their biodiversity targets. So they often give farmers grants and supplements to use some of their land so that they're not maximising it, whether that's leaving certain bits out from being actually farmed or cut for rewilding and wildlife projects. There's so much stuff that goes into that for farmers and time set aside that is not just about making profits.
But that's going to be the really massive farms, isn't it? That's going to be the huge farms. If you're struggling to
take onto these grants, will then be able to access them, and that is made up with.
So they're already being given money. They're being given money to do these things.
But that doesn't allow.
So put the money to one side. Put the money to one side. Use it to pay your inheritance tax.
So then, if they was to say, okay, we're not going to take that supplement from the government, we're just going to farm this to get the absolute maximum, then how would they meet their agreements that they've already made and the pledges that they've already made without the farmer? They would not be able to do it then, the government themselves.
I think you're overcomplicating the issue. We're looking really for the explanation of why somebody in possession of a £3, £4, £5 million estate deserves even more preferential treatment from the government from the Treasury than they already receive. And your answer is because they get loads of money already from the government to do not farming.
Exactly. So they're not allowed to maximise the profits, to just make it an all-out Amazon Jeff Bezos standards.
But again, I mean, we dealt with that at the beginning, didn't we? We said that wasn't the case. It's people saying they won't be able to pay a tax over 10 years that is set at 50% less than all other inheritors would pay. And I entertain the possibility that that's true, but I don't know that we've received much evidence that it is, or I don't know that we've received much evidence that it is actually going on. This is from John, another John, not in Croydon, I don't think. It'd be a bit of no, it was on the west coast of Scotland. So we farm 1,000 acres of Category 3 land on an island off the west coast of Scotland. I pay myself £340 a week, and we've got 23 grand in the bank. Of that, £10,000 will go on winter feed. You don't farm on the west coast of Scotland to make money. You farm because it's a way of life. If it comes to it, we'll sell up and move. But we only have 120 people on an already ageing island, and whoever buys the land will have exactly the same issues as we do. How many other businesses do what they do because it's been in the family for years? It's not to be facetious, quite a lot of businesses. That's all the ones that have got and son or and daughter on their signage. But you are the farmer I'm thinking of, John, actually. What you haven't included in your description of your circumstances is how much you think your land is worth, 1,000 acres on an island off the west coast of Scotland. So if you're still listening, I haven't chased you away with my city slicker ignorance, then just give me a quick heads up on how much you think it's worth, how much you think the land is worth. And also, if it is worth in excess of £3 million, then when you sell it, you're going to be one of the richest people in the country. And that is the bit that we struggle with, I think. Is I could be one of the richest people in the country, but I would rather live on a relative pittance and lead a life of back-breaking hardship. And the Catholic in me kind of admires that. If raised to admire that kind of not quite self-flagellation, but penance, the idea of being born in sin and then having to atone for it for the rest of your life. I quite admire that. But you're also nuts as well at the same time. It's odd, isn't it? So the thing that you get out of it is something that's not about money. In which case, if I was in a really cheeky mood, I'd say, well, then you won't miss the money then, will you? It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:49 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The protests are tomorrow. I'll read you a paragraph from the Guardian newspaper today. And it explains in many ways why I find Twitter an increasingly intolerable environment, because these kind of characters are there in force. So this is about farming protests tomorrow, right? And it's an article that also points out that some of Jeremy Clarkson's recent contributions to the discourse have found great favour with people like Nick Griffin, the former leader of the British National Party. Activists from the extremist group Patriotic Alternative have been staging stunts for some time, including with No Farmer, No Food banners in an attempt to piggyback on farmers' concerns. Their rivals in another far-right group, Homeland, have also sought to drum up support on the back of Clarkson's comments. Fringe conspiracy theorists are also expected to be out in force to promote a narrative that there is a globalist plot to control food supplies. Crikey. And this does farmers no favours. I'm not 100% on this. I've got to be honest with you. It may well be that there is some tinkering in the margins that needs to be done. I'm comfortable with the central thrust, particularly given that it recognises the unique role farmers play in our national pageant by requiring them only to pay half of what they would otherwise be required to do. And Jeremy Clarkson has clearly learnt nothing from his comments about wanting Meghan Markle to be paraded naked through the streets of this country while people threw excrement at her, because he now finds himself being criticised by the editor of Farmers Weekly, who has warned just how rapidly the damage one loose-lipped person can do to a cause. So that's no use whatsoever to farmers, but it may already be too late. Nigel Farage, no doubt, will be offering to speak there next, just to really complete the set. It is 11:51, and of course the irony there is that an awful lot of the problems farmers are currently facing are caused by Brexit. That a majority of them, but by no means the entirety of them, voted for. Scott's in Stowmarket, lovely part of the world. Scott, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. Yeah, no, it was just mostly about your sort of the assertion or the idea that a £4 million asset making 25 grand a year must inherently be a bad business person as such.
I'm not comfortable having it repeated back to me. Can we just say a bad business rather than a bad business person?
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, the reality is the £4 million farm in my part of Suffolk is probably about 350 acres with a house and some buildings, and that is not a big farm. It's a small, medium-sized farm, and people are not making any more than that if they're farming conventionally as such.
Yeah.
You could say do something niche, pumpkin patches were mentioned earlier, all that sort of thing, but ultimately not everybody can be niche.
That's true, because if everyone was niche, it wouldn't be niche anymore, would it?
Exactly that, yeah.
But, do you hear or do you feel how it reaches other ears, this conversation about somebody in possession of a £4 million asset barely washing their face?
I do. I absolutely do. It's very hard to articulate. On the day of the budget, you sort of cringed at one or two people ringing in thinking you're trying to make a point that I agree with, but you're not going. It's very difficult to articulate to a layperson.
Well, it's not helped when I'm hitting them over the head with my clever clogs comments either, to be fair.
No, perhaps not. But I think ultimately people do it because they absolutely love it. It's a thing that's in your blood, whether you're a first-generation farmer, which I am, or you're a multi-generational farmer. You do it because you love it, but ultimately I think the government are squeezing farms at a time when they're already extremely squeezed, and the ultimate upshot of it is people taking their lives as a result of government policy, which fundamentally surely makes it a bad government policy, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, the prevalence of suicide among farmers, as you will know, has always been one of the highest in the entire workforce. But one is too many. I think we can all agree about that. Can we go into a bit of the detail of your situation or not? Is that not?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So will you be subject to this if you don't pass it on before you pass away, as it were, 7 years?
I wouldn't be if I died tomorrow, no. But my little ones are 2 and 6 months, and I'd rather hope that by the time I do pass away, which let's hope is a long way,
many decades hence, Scott.
Maybe it would.
So it's not currently worth that much. It's not currently roughly how much do you think your land is worth?
No, our own land is minimal. We only own about 9 acres. The vast majority of what we do is on rented land.
So. And do we have a rough idea of how much your landlord holds, how much land they have?
Landlords would farm about 200 acres or so. So, I mean, what we're doing is actually sheep dairy, which is pretty niche.
Yes.
But that's how you try and build a business in the current climate. As I say, that's all well and good. But if everyone else started doing sheep dairy too, then it wouldn't be profitable anymore because the price would drop.
To clarify, the house is not included in the calculations, as it were?
In my calculations?
No, in the inheritance. This is agricultural land that we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's your agricultural business. Yeah. It's land plus livestock plus machinery, which is all adding quite a substantial amount.
Have we got a ballpark figure of how much yours is currently worth? If you don't want to tell me, just say so. I don't want to be nosy or coy.
If we owned the rented land as such?
Well, no, because this is what I mean, is as soon as we dig into the detail, you're not even affected by it, and you're unlikely ever to be. And if you are, it'll be because you've done so well, you've been able to buy the land from the person you're currently renting it off.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. But,
so again, I'm putting my violin back in the case now, Scott.
Well, no, but I would say that my sort of contemporaries, the people I spend time with and all the rest of it, grew up with, went to young farmers with, the vast majority of them would be eligible to pay at least some amount of tax, and I know that they are deeply concerned about it because I think...
And it would be over 10 years. It would be over 10 years and only on the sum in excess of 3 million, probably, in most cases.
The CLA, the Country Land Association, produced figures, which I've no reason to discredit, which I think suggest that for a 450-acre farm, which, again, is a medium-sized farm at most, if they were going to pay over 10 years, the amount they'd be paying would be 160% of their profits every year.
Yeah, which is obviously completely unsustainable. I mean, you, as you say, you've got no reason to doubt their figures, but they exist solely to protect the interests of the owners of land, property and businesses in rural England and Wales. So equally, you might respond by saying, well,
aren't producing figures, are they?
They would say that, wouldn't they? Probably the better figures would be the ones from DEFRA, which don't necessarily support the government's predictions of how many farms would actually be affected. You're right, though. There's a sense, I think you have it more than I do, because it's your cause, not mine, that there is a sort of there's a zinger here somewhere that no one's quite found yet. There's a point that people opposed to the idea of this tax. There's a sense that there is something you could bring to the table that would actually shut down a lot of the quibbling and criticism, but we can't quite identify what it is. Does that sound right to you?
I guess ultimately it boils down to people who've got farms don't want them broken up, and a lot of other people in the countryside don't either. Other people may be more comfortable with that, but I just wanted to make sure that you have to understand that the value of land has absolutely nothing to do with the productivity.
And that is unique. And that is unique. There's no other income stream dependent upon asset where anyone would contemplate this level of return, except possibly if you owned a shop, if you had the freehold of the shop from generations, then you wouldn't actually have to be running a particularly effective business. You just have to sell enough to pay yourself a salary. You wouldn't have to be paying your rent to a landlord or paying. Do you want to tell me more about your cheese and dairy products? Sheep cheese. I can't believe I just said that on the radio. Do you want to tell me more about your sheep cheese, Scott?
What would you like to know, Alan?
Well, I want to help you sell some if I can.
So we sell milk to a cheesemaker locally. Okay. They produce a cheese called Pytel, which you can pick up at Neal's Yard in Borough Market.
What's it called again? Spell it for me.
Pytel, Pighle. I don't know if that's a Suffolk word, but it relates to something to do with the churches.
Oh, there you go. So I'll put some of that on my... Were you affected at all by that big robbery?
No. Well, yeah, absolutely. So the milk that we sell gets turned into cheese, which is sold by Neal's Yard. But
Neal's Yard lost... They got about £250,000 worth of cheese nicked last month.
I know. But no idea what you do with that amount of cheese on the black market. How do you shift it before it goes off?
Oh, there's a phone in for another day, eh? Good luck to you, Scott, seriously. A very agreeable alliteration as well on that course. Scott's in Stowmarket, which is, of course, in Suffolk. Ben has no alliteration whatsoever. He's in Sidmouth in East Devon with the last word on this. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. Yes, I would like to say, as a new entrant farmer like your previous guy I approve of agricultural relief being removed. I see it as a mechanism that has increased the price of agricultural land beyond the agricultural market value. Somebody who is only running a farm, from the income that they've generated, it is becoming unviable for them to buy more land to expand, simply because land is no longer an agricultural asset; it's become a financial asset, where its true value is obtained when it's inherited.
Yes. So this you think will be good for the farming community as a whole?
Well, when I speak to my neighbours who are third generation farmers, that when I bought my land and started to talk about the price of the land, this is what their concerns were, that they no longer can expand their businesses based on their sole agricultural income because it's been priced out by tax avoidance.
By people like effect, Dyson and Clarkson coming in and buying up huge amounts of farmland to avoid inheritance tax.
Precisely that.
But then the government's done a really bad job on getting this across, hasn't it?
I mean, in the last 20 years, you look at the graph of the price of agricultural land from 2005 or so, all of a sudden the trajectory changes upwards dramatically. And now that obviously then international investors, such as the Saudi wealth fund, has jumped in and started buying land just because of the upward trajectory of the price.
Because it's like having gold. It's like having gold in a vault or 10 empty flats in Knightsbridge.
That's right.
And that's what the government is moving to nix.
Precisely. So if we can return the value to a third of perhaps it was, then your asset. I mean, I hear all of these farmers talking about their 1% return that they're getting. Well, that's because your asset is overvalued. If it was a third of the value of which it is now, then all of a sudden your returns are 3%, 4%, 5% on your asset, which, although it's the same amount of money, it might be a more reasonable and more acceptable return on your asset.
Bloody hell. Why are you a farmer? You should be an economist. I suppose you've got to be an economist to be a farmer.
I studied agricultural economics at university a long time ago, and these issues have bothered me ever since.
Well, you're ahead of the game on this one, and I'm very glad you were listening today. Very, very briefly, given that you mentioned you were an entrant farmer, and given that the work, as we've established, is backbreakingly hard, what is it that drew you to it? What is it that made you make that leap?
I don't know. James's passion and an interest in natural resource management has always existed there. James, like you, I grew up in a farmhouse which wasn't owned by my parents. Perhaps that stimulated an interest.
Yes, but you just always fancied it. You always had it in your sights as a destination.
Yeah. We moved into that house when I was 6 years old, and I argued my case with my siblings about who got the bedroom, who looked at the farmyard, and it was me. And ever since then, that's all that I've wanted to do. Now, I, like 55% of farmers in the country, have to have a second income.
Yes.
So I work off farm to enable, and the profits that I make cutting hedges and building fences enable me to achieve my own self-actualization by managing the land and the livestock that I care deeply about.
Wow, I could not be happier for you.
Thanks very much.
No, I really mean that. So you've brought a little bit of romance to a conversation that I didn't actually think would have any. And I'm not that surprised, Ben, because, as you know, I sat down with James Rebanks a couple of weeks ago, the author of, most recently, The Place of Tides, but The Shepherd's Life, English Pastoral. If you want to understand what Ben is talking about, and it is farming as a salve for the soul, even as it's backbreaking and difficult, then I would recommend all of James's books as well. Ben, thank you. Last word on this. I hadn't seen this, but I think it is true that Keir Starmer is currently barred from Jeremy Clarkson's pub, but Nick Griffin is welcome. It's a lovely bit of business you got going on there.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Is that the time? 6 minutes after 12 already. And I think we'll do this next. How many people... I nearly said I love shopping. I'm turning into that Paul Whitehouse. It's great, isn't it, shopping? Do you watch Black Friday? Do you wait for it? Have you got something in the back of your mind that you want to get your hands on, and you're thinking it might actually come down appreciably in cost when that day dawns? Have you got anything in mind? Do you know, I'm so boring. I could do a phone in on what it is you've really got your eyes on. I'd actually like that. So, oh, really? Oh, yeah, I've got one of those. So I bought something that I'm very excited by. I've bought a thing that wakes you up gently during the winter months by emulating the effect of sunlight. So it starts, you can set it. It's a clock radio, but a fancy one. Part of me wonders why the tea's made went out of fashion, actually. I'd say it was lovely to wake up to a cup of tea. But anyway, you set it, and it starts very gently with a very orangey glow. But you find yourself whether it wakes you up quite sharply or not, you find yourself feeling a lot more energized. I hate waking up in the dark. This isn't, by the way, what the topic is going to be about. I'm just talking about stuff that you buy, and you buy it online. In fact, I had a very strange experience yesterday when I had a bit of a lie-in, as is my wont. And my thing was gently waking me up. So I'm in that kind of fugue. I'm in that liminal space. I'm in that zone between waking and sleeping when you're not quite sure. Sometimes you hear something on the news in that play, and then you get to work and you think, was that true? Did that actually happen? Did I make that up? I think I came to work once convinced something had happened that hadn't happened because I'd sort of dreamt it during that little period between sleeping and waking when the news is on in the background. I got woken up by hearing somebody discussing my decision to step back from Twitter live on the BBC. That was a bit of a moment where you sit up and go, what the hell what is going on? And someone's just sent me an article that Jeremy Clarkson wrote about me a couple of weeks ago as well. So it's very odd, isn't it? There's only one thing worse than being I might have to write another book just so I can put on the cover, I Truly Love James, Jeremy Clarkson. That would look nice, wouldn't it? It might slightly baffle some readers, but I digress. Because Black Friday is on the way. Yeah, you got there. Oh, that's interesting, Ben. I told you that I was boring. He's got a bulb that does that. You can put it in any lamp. It just gets brighter over the course of an hour. We have gone a bit local radio, but I'm going to move on in a minute. And here's what I want to talk about instead. So they're trying to rename Black Friday Black Fraud Day. There's a warning going out now that Black Friday is the prime time for scammers, according to the UK's cybersecurity chief. Criminals are now deploying AI, would you believe, to trick shoppers. And this is online criminals taking advantage of an eagerness to save money amid the cost of living crisis. Last year, at Christmas alone, how much do you think Brits were scammed out of by online fraudsters? It's about £11.5 million, up about £1 million from the year before, with fake clothing or high-end tech listings on social media among the ploys used to dupe shoppers. Now, as a radio phone-in host, this is one of the weirdest topics going, because sometimes it's absolute gold, and other times it doesn't work at all. Lots of calls from people whose stories aren't very interesting. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the difference is. Do you? You listen enough. You probably listen more closely than I do. Do you know why? Sometimes what do I do differently on the days when we get lots of really interesting calls from people whose experiences can be used as warnings for the rest of us, compared to the days when I try and set up a conversation about scams and we just get loads of people ringing in with the same old gubbins? I don't know what it is, but I do know this. I fell for one very, very, very nearly. So sometimes when I come to discuss scams, I've done so in the past from a slightly snooty, smug, superior perspective, predicated upon the presumption that I could never possibly fall for something like this myself because I'm far too clever. I think that's really dangerous. I suspect, because A, the cleverer you are, the less likely you are to confess, to reveal that you've been done. But also, I think it might create the opposite of what you would otherwise expect. I think it might create a false sense of security. So that's your first qualification for calling in. I don't imagine anyone sits there going, "Oh, I'm really gullible, me. I'm really gullible, me. No surprise. I fell for one, James, but no surprise because I'm a couple of sandwiches short of a picnic." But I do want to introduce criterion number one. You have to be prepared to admit that you thought you were too clever to fall for anything like this. All right. You can only ring in if you honestly thought, if this prior to the actual scam, you would have been either explicitly or implicitly adamant that this could never happen to you. All right, that's a crucial qualification for inclusion. 0345 6060 973. And the psychology of it, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. But they got me. By first of all, and this I think is again something that we probably don't know as much about as we should. You know how the algorithms offer you stuff that you do actually want. Like, this is supposed to be terrifying us and making us fear for the future. And they say, click on cookies and do you accept this and do you accept that? And then you buy something. That was the weirdest thing. I remember when the kids were young and we'd be buying quite a lot of stuff for them. You'd buy a trampoline and for the next year, your Facebook would be full of trampoline sellers. I just bought a trampoline. Why am I being bombarded with advertisements for trampolines? I've just bought one. Honestly, it's ridiculous. And then I went through a very unfortunate phase of buying quite a lot of clothes off the internet, almost none of which ever fitted me. So Mrs. O'Brien does it right. She'll order 2 or 3 different sizes, get the one that fits, and then send the rest back. I think that's how people do it. Normal people, not me. I've got some trousers. You can have them if you want. I've got some trousers at home that are like skateboard trousers. They are so enormous. I could probably get into the legs twice, at least. That's 4 of my legs in one leg of those trousers. Have you seen? They look great online. And then I bought a little shacket the other day, which came approximately to my navel. It was like a bolero shacket on me, not in the photos, not on the adverts. I looked absolutely ridiculous in it. The weirdest thing was the sleeves fitted. But the bolero stopped roughly where my belly button is. It wasn't designed to be a bolero. I'm only 6 foot tall, but goodness me, that looked ridiculous as well. So how did I nearly fall for one? Well, I bought a coat from a shop called Hackett not long ago. It's a really nice coat. And then I'm sitting at home on Facebook, as is my wont of an evening, and up pops the Hackett site, a page for Hackett, the shop Hackett on my Facebook. I said, well, that's very good. And it said warehouse clearance or something like that. So I clicked on it and it's all very, very I've told you this before, but I do think that as someone who really, really did believe he was far too clever to fall for anything like this, it's quite helpful sometimes for me to put myself out there as a kind of exemplar. And it was what was clever about it? 3 things that were clever about it. Number 1, it was a brand I knew and liked because I just bought a coat from them, although quite how Facebook could have known that, I do not know. Number 2, they just did it financially. The discount was too good to miss, but not quite too huge to doubt. In retrospect, I probably should have been suspicious, but let's say it was about a 60% discount. If it was like an 80%, are you looking at me as if I'm stupid? Is 60% an alarm? But I know, because sometimes this happens. And that was point number 3, is that I had previously bought some jumpers, sweaters, pullovers, and I got them for a fraction of the original cost from a company that was actually going into an insolvency, I think, an old Jermyn Street tailor. And I looked it up and I checked it and they had a royal warrant and I did it, ordered the jumpers a little bit, kind of, this looks a bit too good to be true. And then lo and behold, guess what happened? They arrived. And they were lovely, really lovely. You've probably seen them. I've worn them to work in the past. So, number 1, I knew the brand and I liked it. Number 2, the discounts were plausible but incredible. And number 3, I had actually bought stuff from a very, very similar site successfully. So when those 3 things combine, I think you have a recipe for disaster. So I filled it all in and I was buying a lot of clobber. And I got to the end and I'm about to put in my card details. And the only thing that gave it away, do you know what it was? The only thing that gave it away was that the destination for my moolah was a PayPal account. And I thought to myself, there's no earthly way that Hackett, a big high street firm, would have a PayPal account as the banking option for its online offer. Just no way at all. And I still didn't quite want to believe it. I still kind of thought to myself, oh, come on, maybe. And here's the thing that probably is the final piece of the jigsaw. When I found their official website, their actual website, it was a mirror. All they'd done was change the prices and the PayPal account. So that's why it looked plausible. That's why it looked feasible. Now, something like that, and hopefully there'll be some experts listening. Somebody listening will know how that works from the scammer's point of view. So presumably that can only stay up for a couple of days, can't it? Before it gets called out, before it gets reported. But it's worth their while. It doesn't. I can't imagine it takes an enormous amount of effort. And if they'd succeeded on me, they'd have made a few £100 out of it. And same thing happened to Rob in Cornwall. Exactly the same. Bogus site. I just thought at the very last minute it was too good to be true. The URL can also be a bit of a giveaway. And Robert says, look at the hack. I've just looked at that site. You're getting paid too much. That is very negotiable and debatable, Robert. But if I was, then why would I be so drawn to the bargains? You see, it's only one coat, mate, honestly. And I got it in the sale. And anyway, I don't have to explain myself to you. It's 12:18. What happened to you? Black Fraud Day. What happened to you online? And remember, the only qualification for inclusion is that you thought you were too clever to fall for anything like this. But then you found out you were not.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's extraordinary. Thank you. Whoever sent me this, I should give you a little mention, shouldn't I? Because you are absolutely going to march straight into... can you get the Woke Watch sting out of the freezer, please, Keith? Give it a little... stick it in the microwave for a couple of minutes. Can we defrost it? Can we defrost the Woke Watch thing? I've got one of the finest Woke Watches of all time. I wonder if you know what it is yet. And it's a timely reminder that I forgot to give you the answer to the question of... what is facing possible cigarette-style warnings. I did you a little missing words round. Blank needs cigarette-style warnings, says Labour donor. The Labour donor in question is the inimitable Dale Vince, owner of Ecotricity. And what do you think he's got on his sights? Pointing out that it is a Class 1 carcinogen and therefore needs a warning upon it similar to those on tobacco. Bacon. So the headline in the Telegraph today, bacon needs cigarette-style warning, says Labour donor. It's an interview he gave to the Sunday Times yesterday. It wasn't just bacon. He was talking about meat and dairy, the way in which they reducing your intake of them reduces carbon emissions to improve human health, but also talking about the need for actual warnings on, for example, bacon, which is a carcinogen, is classed by the World Health Organization as a Class 1 carcinogen alongside tobacco. So what should we do with it? The same, roughly, that we do with tobacco. There you go. So that's on the list. It's not the question that I've got for you, though. The question that I've got for you this hour is about scams, and we'll do Woke Watch either between Melvin and Natalie or after Natalie. It depends on whether I remember or not, and also whether or not it comes out of the micro. Is it all right? Has it pinged yet? Ping! Is that okay? So, thank you. 12:22 is the time. Melvin's in Ladbroke Grove. Melvin, what made you pick up the phone?
You started this story and I thought this has happened to me, but it shouldn't have. I work in tech, have done for about 20 years, and I advise people on what to do and what to look out for. So that's my background.
That is your actual job, among other things?
Amongst other things, but yes, cybersecurity comes into it as well.
Okay.
So this was about 15, 16 years ago, but I once paid £300 for a bag of onions.
This wasn't online?
It was online. It was advertised online, but it was actually on Gumtree. So I used to buy and sell like computer parts, and sell things, put things together, and sell them as complete units. And there was this one guy advertising different laptops, 1, 2, 3, and I said, "Oh, I really like the look of number 2.
Yeah.
Can you show me some details?" Showed me the details, and he's like, "Yep, come and meet me." I went to meet him, and he said, "Oh, I'm just leaving to go to work. I'll meet you outside in the car." Met him outside in the car, showed me the laptop. It was the laptop.
Yeah.
He tried to change the price at the very last second. I said no. He went to drive away, did a bag switch, then hung the bag out the window. I gave him the money. He drove off, and I thought, that was weird.
Yeah.
Opened the bag.
Yeah.
It was a bag of onions. So,
it's the oldest scam in the book, really, isn't it?
It was the oldest scam in the book. I was only about 20 at the time, but it just really made me think about it. But I think it ties into, how people get scammed online, which is, they have something that you want, you're interested in it anyway, and you think you're getting a good deal.
Yes.
And then what ends up happening is because you already maybe have researched it in the past, or you've got a very clear picture in your mind, you think you're getting a great deal. So you almost tend to overlook some of the things you'd be more skeptical about. And I think that's how they get you. But the thing that there's always telltale signs online, absolutely always. So two things that scammers cannot do. They cannot fake the web address. So if it's amazon.co.uk,
it's real.
They can't fake that.
Yeah.
So what they will do is their site might be like amazon.co.uk, but the Amazon is spelt with double A.
Yeah.
So there'll be a very slight spelling misconception.
See this with banks as well, don't you? When banks scams.
And then the other thing is that they can't do is they can't fake email addresses. So you might get an email that says from thissite.com, but when you look at that's just the name. When you look at the from address, it will be like amazon.co.at@hotmail.com. So they can't fake an email address either. So usually if you check just the website name very specifically and very clearly, or the email address very specifically and very clearly, you can always tell that it's from a scam source. And they're the easiest ways to check and not be scammed.
That's really helpful, actually. And you haven't been caught since?
No, I haven't, but I always tell that story about the onions just as
well, it's happened to quite a few people listening, actually, including Mark and others. An awful lot of people are concerned more about the way I pronounce cigarette. I don't know why people get so hung up on that. It's like Benedict Cumberbatch and penguins. And is it roughly steady now, the level of fraud, do you think, in your experience?
No, it goes up. It's gone up.
They're getting better at it then?
They're getting better at it, and it's easier to produce the content now. There's I've got tools that I use legitimately to download pictures and stuff from websites.
Sure.
Now, you can use those tools to download absolutely everything, and then you can just copy and paste it, put it on a different website, and it will look exactly the same. And then behind the scenes, they can just link it to whatever payment e-commerce system that they want. So what I would say about online purchases is never, ever follow an advert through a social media link. Just don't do it. Even if you like it, go to the website yourself and look it up that way. And if it is on social media, 9 times out of 10, they'll have some kind of discount or promo code. And in that case, do the same thing. Go to the site, put it in the basket yourself directly, and then try the promo code out of it. But never follow the link all the way through to completion from the social media link, because that is the number one way that they get you.
There you go. Good man. There you go. You really know your onions, don't you?
Yeah.
Thank you. It is 27, but that only occurred to me at the last minute there. It was almost as if I'd set up the entire call to do that weak joke at the end, but as if I'd do something like that. Melvin, stay safe. Natalie's in Lewisham. Natalie, what happened to you?
So basically exactly what the last caller told me not to do.
Sorry to laugh. But
so I basically saw an ad on Facebook for a beauty advent calendar.
Yeah.
Thought it looked amazing. Sent it to my mum and my partner.
Yeah.
Who both ordered it. So basically, I had called them to, put in the details.
Yeah, but so they probably paid a little bit less attention than they would have done if it hadn't come from you, because they'd have thought that you wouldn't have sent it to them without doing the most basic sort of checking.
I was the reliable middleman who wasn't reliable. So they both ordered it. My mum luckily got a text straight away from her bank saying this isn't right.
Oh, really?
Yeah, literally instantly. My partner, who's with the same bank, said that they couldn't do anything until basically they had taken payment.
Right.
Which he had to wait a week for. But it's really annoying because my mum's had an issue before with Amazon.
Yes.
And I laughed at her really badly.
Really?
Yeah. And I feel like that was my karma.
It was your karma. And was it a brand you liked? It was.
Yeah, so it was like a Space NK advent calendar, which is a beauty company.
Yeah, all right, mate. I'm not completely stupid. I know what Space NK is.
Well, I don't know.
Well, of course everyone knows what Space. I'm only 52. I've got 2 daughters. I've just come Christmas. I'm in and out of there like a yo-yo, like a fiddler's elbow. Okay. So it's high end, and it was a biggish discount, was it?
Yeah, it was probably a little bit too good.
Yeah, so they reeled you. It's exactly the same as me with the Hackett thing. Is it just? I thought, blimey, I'll have a bit of that, and I think that something happened psychologically. You only realise afterwards it was too. They must just get it right, mustn't they? That figure. It must just be just enough to make you turn off your normal sensibilities.
And I think, like you said, it's coming to this time of year, so you're kind of like looking out for those amazing deals. You're
not going to get an amazing deal on a beauty advent calendar. You might get an amazing deal on a beauty advent calendar in January, Natalie, but you're not going to get one in November when they're knocking it out at full price and then some. Thank you. And there it goes. Happen to anybody. It's just the psychology of it is fascinating. Remember that state corporate maximisation I used to wang on about when we were talking about the fixed odds betting terminals and the way that the returns on those, it's fine-tuned. Absolute. So, I mean, all of the obvious stuff, like the way that the flashing lights and things like that attract you. But the relationship between winning and pumping money in, you win just enough. It's fine-tuned to the nth degree to keep you putting money in until you haven't got any of your wages left. Thank you for that. It's 12:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33 is the time. This is nice. Miles is helping us out a little bit because I run an e-commerce brand, James, and PayPal is widely regarded as one of the safest payment options for buyers. With PayPal Buyer Protection, this sounds like a live read. Our customers can easily claim refunds if anything goes wrong, making it an unlikely choice for scammers to promote with your Hackett purchase. Well, it's good news to know that if I'd gone through with it, I probably would have got a refund through them, but that is categorically what happened. That said, e-commerce businesses like mine also face risks such as card fraud and transactions made with stolen cards. It's a constant balance of safeguarding both our customers and the integrity of our business at this time of year. Yeah, it does ramp up. And I like this one because as soon as quite a few of you have never heard of Space NK, which is fine, but I had. So I just felt that, Natalie was treating me a bit like an old fella who wouldn't know his way around the glamorous spots on the high street. It's Space, new word, NK. As in the letter N and the letter K. It's not Space and K. And it's certainly not this, which came in from Patrick. Are you sure you should have people on your programme talking about buying space cake calendars? Space NK. Thank you. But I stand by what I said about calendars at this time of year. Why would they be knocking them out at a discount when they're trying to get as much full price as they can? Pop into a shop on Christmas Eve by all means, and a late Christmas Eve or certainly early after Christmas, and you might get one. But here's a really good example from Carl, who's in Banbury. Last night, my other half tagged me in a post on Facebook for a £3 Lego advent calendar. Once I checked, I saw that it was clearly a scam. She said she'd already paid £3. After further investigation, it turned out her £3 was for a subscription to a CV writing company in the Czech Republic, complete with a recurring £41 monthly charge. Yeah, but did it do a good job on the CVs, Carl? I think this is the crucial question. And before we go to Matthew, it's been a while since we did one of these, hasn't it?
Woke Watch.
Woke Watch. Why did we stop? We stopped because it kind of stopped. We stopped seeing stories every day about something now being woke. Everything was. Do you remember? For a period of time, everything was woke. This headline single-handedly drags Woke Watch back to the top of the programme's agenda from inevitably the Mail. Well, not inevitably, but from the Mail on this occasion. You ready? What do you think's gone woke now? You ready for this? Now Gen Z are waging war on your sandwiches. How younger Brits are ditching English classics like ham and mustard in favour of fancy woke fillings. Who wants to have a guess at what a woke sandwich filling is? Anyone? Okay, I'll tell you. So the first sandwich filling that appears in the Mail's article as evidence of Gen Z, gym-loving. They're described as gym-loving Gen Z. That's GYM, not me. Gym-loving. Gym-loving Gen Z. Guess what they've got as their first example of a woke sandwich filling? While sliced ham is a sandwich stalwart for the older generations, with a quarter, 26%, of boomers saying it's their number one meat, gym-loving Gen Z prefer... What do you think it is, the woke sandwich filling that gym-loving Gen Z prefer to ham? Do you want to have a guess? Nope. Chicken. Someone has actually written an article which posits the idea that chicken is somehow woke. English cheddar also appears to be on the decline, despite being enjoyed by nearly 6 in 10 Brits, according to a survey of 2,000 sandwich lovers. Just 2/3 of boomers say cheddar is their favourite cheese for a sandwich, with that number falling through the age groups to just over half of Gen Z. Well, what on earth are they eating instead of delicious English cheddar cheese? Gen Z are almost as likely to include continental cheese. You need Peter Kay to say that with the contempt that it truly deserves, don't you? Continental, or Paul Calf, one of Steve Coogan's long ago characters. Continental cheese. Continental cheese. Yes, continental cheese. And also avocado, inevitably, peppers, chilies and olives, with a third of Gen Z opting for upmarket extras over just 1 in 10 boomers. So now you know. No, there's no tofu or quinoa or any of the things that you think might be there. The first thing they've gone for as evidence of woke sandwich fillings is chicken.
Woke Watch.
Quite like to get that back again, but it all depends on what the right-wing media does with this sort of nonsense. 12:38 is the time. Back to the scams. Danny's in Tring. Danny, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I heard you just talking there about PayPal,
yeah.
And it just reminded me of the time that I got scammed. During lockdown, basically, I make singing content with my singing cat on TikTok.
Oh, yes.
And I got a message.
There's a lot of it about, isn't there? Your cat sings.
My cat sings. She's a Bengal. She uses the human toilet, and she's very popular online, and we post videos on TikTok.
Okay.
So
is she there? Is she there now?
She is here now, yes. But she's a cat, so if she doesn't meow for you, it's not that
I don't
she doesn't
want you
like
doing.
you.
I don't want you doing anything.
That's right.
Coercive.
You can't make her do anything she doesn't want to do. That's the thing.
You can lead a cat to the radio, but you can't make it sing.
Now?
Yeah, please.
Okay, wait there.
What's that? You say you just tuned in? I've got a bloke. He's going to make his cat sing. Here it is.
Here we go. If you're happy and you know it, say meow. If you're happy and you know it, say meow. If you're happy and you know it and you really want to show it, if you're happy and you know it, say meow. Told you.
2 out of 3.
2 meows.
2 out of 3 ain't bad, is it? Did you get the third? No. Anyway, back to the scam.
So I just got a message, and I hadn't thought about selling any videos, but a man messaged me and said, I'll give you $20 if you sing Happy Birthday to my mum.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, great. So I gave him my address, my PayPal address, and it came through, and I clicked, and it was a request for money, not a I'll give you money. I'd never used PayPal before, and during lockdown I thought...
So you accidentally sent him $20?
Yes. And after it said money sent, I actually messaged the guy and said, mate, thank you so much for that lesson, because it only cost me 20. It could have been 100, you know?
Yeah, you could have taken me for a lot more than that.
But, James, we'll do you a jingle if you want. Magic anytime on TikTok.
OK, well done for squeezing in that advert at the end there. It would have been nicer if you'd waited for me to invite you, but still, you know, the entrepreneurial spirit is strong in this one. And the cat did meow. 12:40 is the time. Well done, Danny. Take care. That's why young people can't afford a house. They're eating all these woke sandwiches. And then we should have a little prize for texts that managed to knit together themes from earlier in the programme into a single joke. We can't do prizes, but so I've lost it now. But that was very, very, very funny. Someone who texted in to say Gordon Brown got scammed when he sold all the gold. Matthew's in Watford. Matthew, what made you pick up the phone?
Hey, James.
Hello,
first time caller.
Welcome.
I put my phone on Facebook Marketplace up for sale, and it was up for about 2 or 3 days before an account, I'm going to say, messaged me saying that he would buy it.
Yeah.
I'm a single dad of 3 kids, so I'm really busy, so I didn't actually... And again, I was ignorant because... I
don't beat yourself up.
But yeah, so the guy, he kind of fooled me because he wanted me to meet at his house, and I wasn't able to due to work. So I said, I've got a few hours now. You can come to me, which he was okay with. And he came round and he came in. He seemed like a nice chap. He asked me for a bag to get all the stuff. And on his way over, because I couldn't list more than one thing on Facebook, I said to him, would you like a watch as well?
Yeah.
Because I've got the watch to go with it. And he said, yeah, lovely. I'll come round. I'll have a look. Anyway, after messing around getting him a bag, we had a small chat about what the money was for, because it's for my kids for a holiday, because they've never been abroad. And he smiled and he pulled out his phone and logged into the Metro, what I thought was the Metro bank account, which now I learned is a clone banking app. I watched him type my details in, and I watched his phone say that it sent me the £600. I looked at my bank and saw that it didn't go in, and normally I do it to my Barclays, but I put it to my Monzo.
Right.
And he, happy to help me, Googled and said, Google's saying it takes up to 2 hours. And silly me didn't want him to wait 2 hours. I said, okay, mate, you seem genuine. And off he went. And about half an hour after that, I texted him saying, I haven't got the money yet. And he was like, yeah, it should be in. Let me know as soon as you've got it. So it was still nice as pie. Right. And it put my mind at ease.
Oh, no.
And then over 2 hours to go past, and I was blocked and deleted, and
the whole
my stuff had gone.
That's bold, isn't it? Coming to your house and everything.
Extremely.
So he wasn't serious when he said that he wanted you to go around his. If you'd said, yeah, all right, I'll see you at 4 o'clock, he'd have come up.
He gave me a postcode.
Yeah, but it wasn't real, was it?
No, of course it wasn't.
So if you'd said, I'll see you at 4 o'clock at yours, he'd have come up with an excuse, but it lulls you. It's very
really
sophisticated. I sometimes wonder why they don't put these kind of efforts into legitimate money-making schemes, because it's so hard-working. And you never saw... Did you report it? Did you go to the police?
Yeah, I reported it to the police, but they couldn't... I did learn a few things with the questions that they asked me, like, did he haggle you? Which haggling is rife on Facebook, and he didn't.
So that would have been one a little alarm bell, trying to get 50 quid knocked off.
Because when me mum and me dad they've been done for 40 and 80, and I'm like, you're so silly.
Yeah.
To then get done myself, I was absolutely gutted.
Of course you were. Of course you were.
Like, almost brought to tears without the amount of money that I lost, although that was a big hit. Yeah.
It's a shame, isn't
vulnerable.
it? It's a shame.
Yeah.
I think.
And to come into my house and for me to explain to you what the money's going for.
Oh, and then to still walk away with it.
And then ask me for a bag and take the watch. Yeah, it was a kick in the balls, and it was enough to bring me to tears.
Oh, mate, you should. Well, I can completely. I'd have been exactly the same in your situation, right up to and including the tears as well, because it's just offensive and it's kind of. I don't know, it's a violation as well, Matthew. Look after yourself, mate. Take care, seriously. And don't beat yourself up. It could happen to absolutely anybody. And that is the serious end of why I said you can only contribute to this conversation if you honestly thought it could never happen to you. So the whole point of it is that, of course, it could. And everyone so far has kind of proved that point. You look after yourself. It's coming up to 1:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:47. I was only half serious when I tried to imagine what a woke sandwich filling might actually look like. Dan Howdell does some of this stuff for a living. He's come up with my two favourites so far. You could have a Hamnesty International sandwich, or, this is really good, an LGBLT. That's got to be the most woke sandwich out. I'd have an LGBLT, please. I will accept other submissions on that as well. You can text it to 84850, or you can contact me on Blue Sky, which is the social media platform I currently favour, as you would have heard on Radio 4 yesterday. The PayPal thing is obviously a little bit more than I realise. What they're trying to do is get you to do what the man with the singing cat did, Danny, is enter your PayPal details, and they end up then so it wouldn't even have been that I'd paid. If you see, that they could have skimmed me if I'd had a PayPal account. And do you know what? I think I'm being a bit clever. I'm not on PayPal. I don't have a PayPal account. I wonder if that was a bigger reason why I decided this was not to be trusted than actual little alarm bells going off. But there's an awful lot going on. The same thing happened to me, James. I'm getting a lot of messages that begin with this sentence. The exact same thing happened to me. He used the fake bank app to show that he was transferring the money. I told him to do a penny first, and when that didn't come in, he tried to actually give me counterfeit cash. That's from James in Folkestone. It is 12:48. Darius is in Horsham. Darius, what made you pick up the phone?
Long-time listener, first time speaking to you, James.
Well done, Darius. Thank you.
This clever clogs here owns and runs a very successful technology repair / IT company.
Yes.
And multiple times a week we have people in who have been scammed, phished, hacked, what have you, to have their devices checked over to make sure there's nothing spurious going on.
Right.
So I have a story which I tell every customer to kind of make them feel more at ease that they're not stupid.
Yeah, you heard Matthew a moment ago. He was still beating himself up, wasn't he? It was sad, that. Very poignant.
So, My hosting company for my business, so the hosting company essentially holds the website, all emails, all that kind of malarkey. So everything that supports the business is through the hosting company.
Yes.
And if I'm not up to date with my subscription or one's coming up, I get a couple of emails from them. And if I'm really lazy and have done nothing about it, I will get a text message from them. So Clever Clogs here, a couple of Christmases back, 1 or 2 small sherries may have been consumed, possibly more. Late afternoon, sitting down, yummy Christmas dinner, my phone goes ping, and there it is from my hosting company.
Actual Christmas Day, this is?
This is Christmas Day, indeed.
Oh, wow, okay. I don't know why. The part of me thought they'd have taken the day off.
You'd have thought so, but this is where it gets clever, you see.
Yes, of course.
So the text message looked very, very genuine.
Right.
But having had a couple of sherries, I wasn't exactly...
Oh, then you're busy.
Yeah, well, yes, there you go. So I'm like, oh, damn, can't let this go. Stupid me. Click on the thing, thump in my details, payment goes through, and then my blood starts running cold, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, why on earth would it be Christmas Day? I would have never have purchased and set this up on a 12-month subscription on Christmas Day.
That's a very good point, yeah.
Checked my bank, bad things were happening, phoned the bank, who were brilliant. Wow. They managed to stop everything and reverse stuff, cancelled the card, all this kind of thing, which put paid to my business because it was a business account.
Right.
So I couldn't do anything for days, but it was a very long lesson learned, that one. Old Clever Clogs that's always telling people, check things very, very carefully, got done himself.
Good Lord. Good Lord. And obviously no long-term losses or damage, but except your pride, I suppose.
Yep, but it's the sort of thing you've got to look at and laugh at. You've got to laugh at yourself.
Well, as long as you caught it in time. So let's just run through quickly what happened here. So the date is crucial, not just for you smelling a rat, albeit a little bit late, but the date reduces your likelihood to scrutinise the situation. It increases the likelihood of you just wanting to get it dealt with and move on.
Absolutely, having the timing absolutely spot on, knowing that people would have had a few and wouldn't be on their sharpest. So, yes.
Yeah, and the plausibility of it is enhanced by the quality of the message itself, the fact that it looks completely kosher.
Absolutely.
And that's it, really. And then it is just cross your fingers. I wonder how many, I mean, you might know this, given your professional expertise. How many of those might they have sent out? How many of like a fishing expedition?
I think it was very targeted.
Yeah, I do too. That's why I asked.
Yeah, it would be to people who they know would have hosting services. So probably tens of thousands, I would imagine.
But they've done some research, haven't they? They've really done that.
They have.
Thank you.
The timing was spot on. The phone number. It wasn't even a random phone number. It had the company name.
Good Lord. Which is quite easy to do, apparently, if you're so minded. I hope Matthew's still listening, because if it can happen to you, then it can happen to anyone, which I know I fully appreciate is the point of your... is the point of your call. It is 12:52. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Does that work, Greta Thunberg? No, it's quite funny, but it's not. You wouldn't have it's like, what would a woke sandwich? You're not going to beat LGBLT. And apparently, Marks and Spencer's actually did that during Pride, where they added some guacamole to a BLT. I bet that was always avocados, isn't it? With the woke lot, it's always avocados. Is it the most woke food stuff going? An avocado. Oliver's in Poppington. That's a shame. That's not your name. That Oliver. Oliver Poppington has a lovely ring to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah.
Oliver Poppington. Oliver Poppington. Sorry, Oliver. What did you want to say?
Okay, James. Yeah. So what was I moved house, and I was having the garage converted into a usable room.
Oh yeah.
So I called up a builder for a quote, and it wasn't just any old builder off. It was a builder I've used before, used him quite a few times, trusted him, I knew the person, a good bloke. So he came, he gave me a quote, and he said, I've seen your quote for your email, which I said, yeah, sure. So I got this email quote from him.
Right.
And I was happy with it, and I said, yeah. I emailed him back and said, yeah, can you start and all that? And he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. Anyway, a couple of days before we were going to start, he sent me... I received an email asking for some money up front. So the conversion was going to be about £10,000. And he asked me for £1,500 for materials, which seemed reasonable, that he would want the money up front for the materials. And I checked the email address. This is something I wanted to say. Just because an email address is genuine, it doesn't mean you actually got that person on the end of the email address. So it doesn't mean you're going to avoid scams. So you need to... you need to be careful that the email address hasn't been hacked, like in my case. So what had happened was somebody has hacked my builder's email address, and they've been reading the emails between me and my builder. They've also been able to read all these other emails to his other clients, and they've been able to copy and paste this text so they sound exactly like him. So it was his email address, and it was in the way he would write, in his style of writing. And choose the moment perfectly. Exactly. They're sort of reading it. They know what's going on. They know exactly what work you're having done. They know your address. They know everything. And it's not me who got hacked. It was the builder. And then so because I trusted the builder, I sent the money over, no problem. Of course. And when alarm bells rang was the next day, he then said, I'm going to need another £1,000.
Oh, wow.
Now, apparently when you've been scammed once, you're more likely to fall for it again because it's that Fallon's thing where you keep putting more money into
exactly
something.
Right.
That's why I believe you're being scammed.
That's why Boris Johnson got elected in 2019, 3 years after Brexit.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And you didn't fall for it the second time?
I didn't fall for it the second time, but obviously I lost £1,500. And when I Googled it, it turned out that the scam has happened before, and it often happens with solicitors. So they try to hack into a solicitor's email address, and then they do someone for the house deposit, and people's buying a house has actually fallen through, and they've lost tens of thousands of pounds, and they maybe had to save up years for that, and then they can't afford to buy the dream home. So I actually felt like losing £1,500 wasn't too bad compared to some people.
And did you not? There was no chance of getting it back?
There wasn't at the time. I think the law's changed because that was 5 or 6 years ago, just before lockdown when we bought the house.
And did you report it?
We tried to. We contacted the banks and all that, but we gave the money willingly to this person.
That's the problem. So you didn't go to the police?
I can't remember. Quite a while ago.
Fair enough.
The police. I think we've got a crime reference number, but
you'd need one, but they're not going to be able to track it down.
We did call the police, but they just couldn't track it down.
Thank you, mate. Someone will benefit from you sharing that story, because all it would have taken was a quick phone call to the builder, right? Just to say, just checking this is you. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. We found out afterwards, before you send the money over, you ring up and say, I've got your email. Yeah. Is this right, the bank account details and the amount of money you want? And obviously he would have said, I don't know what you're talking about. And
and there it is. Well, thank you for that. All of these stories work as warnings, as well as being, interesting stories in their own right. Bizarrely, while you were talking, another Oliver got in touch to ask, James, have you covered the thousands of North Korean soldiers that have become addicted to adult films since they hit the ground in Russia? I haven't, but I believe Sheila's doing an hour on it from 2 o'clock today. Is that right?
I'm doing an hour on Ukraine, but I might not be mentioning.
Not covering that angle. No. Okay. Oh well. Kelly's in Sawbridgeworth. Kelly, last word on this, I suspect, to you. What's it going to be?
Hello. Yeah, I applied for a job on Indeed, and it was with a recruitment agency, a banking job, which I've worked in banking, or had worked in banking previously for 20 odd years. Yeah. So I knew of all, anti-money laundering policies and everything to look out for that. So I applied for this job, and this guy contacted me who said he was from a recruitment agency. It all looked fine. Oh, yeah, the hiring manager wants to see you for an interview next week. When's your availability? To rush through the process, we need you to carry out verification checks. Click on this link. Clicked on the link, and it was to upload my passport details.
Right.
And the same bank was part of the group that I was applying for the job for, or what it was meant to be for. So I thought it was all fine, all above board. And Monday morning, I phoned the recruitment agency, and they said this person is an imposter.
Oh, no.
He doesn't work for us. And my heart was just like...
Of course it was.
Oh, no. What have I done? So then I had to contact the police, contact the bank. He had applied for a credit card with 5,300 credit. My postman knew me, so he knocked on the door with this letter with a credit card PIN number, which was set up 20 doors away. But he knew me, so he gave it to me and said, look, this has come
and
from
did they catch the person?
Number 2, not 22. And then, no, I got a crime reference number.
So what was he going to do? Was it? I mean, why would it be $20? I'm going into Colombo.
I don't know.
No, nor do I. I'm going into
Whether
Colombo.
Whether he was going to intercept.
Yeah, well, try some.
Intercept it.
So you didn't lose
Because it
anything?
didn't come to me.
You didn't lose anything?
Well, no, but then obviously the whole situation where I had to cancel my passport.
Yeah, of
I still haven't got the money to get another one yet, but I just said.
And you feel it.
Long.
You feel a mug as well, don't you? That's
I
the
couldn't
problem.
believe it.
No.
But I'd never heard of this scam.
No, I've never heard of it before either.
On Indeed, it was a professional. It all looked fine.
Yeah.
The agency was real. But yeah.
But he just got in there. I mean, that is, perfect example of how it is constantly evolving, and they're constantly coming up with new ways. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. If they dedicated those levels of energy and imagination to doing legitimate things, I'm sure they'd be able to make a decent living without leaving such a trail of destruction and sadness in their wake. Thank you, Kelly. Stay safe. It is time for me to hand over. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. So download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.